Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Bodida and Creso Pal, I think is how you said. Welcome to everybody. We have a couple of apologies this morning. We have apologies from Kevin, and we also have apologies from Tim. And as I said once before, just for the benefit of those people who are watching in terms of the governance, that this board meeting is the end really of a governance process, and that the detailed scrutiny of all of the papers has been done in all of our committees. So it isn't redone here, it's been done already. This is the final process of the governance process. And of course, all of the papers that have been accompanying this, this meeting have been read at length and discussed in those committees, and they have been available to anybody externally who wants to look at them. Now, this meeting is of course being recorded and is being broadcast, so we need to bear that of course in mind. I think that's all I need to say. Declarations of interest, can I ask if we have any new ones? Doesn't look like it. Grand. Also then moving on to the minutes, I'm not going to review the minutes, we've all had a chance to read them, the minutes of the last meeting. Just ask if anybody has any questions or comments on those minutes, and then no. So can I ask if we are prepared to approve those minutes of the last meeting? So there we are, that's good, thank you very much. Those are approved. We have some other minutes to approve, but that's later in the agenda. And then on the action log, there were only 2 items on the action log. One has been completed, which relates to risk, and there are items on the agenda which talk to that item. The other is an issue around cultural measures to be added to the MIPQR, which Rachel, I think you're still working on.
Yes. Yes, so that is exactly right. I think we, Angie and I have had a couple of conversations. We haven't concluded at the moment. The measures that are in there are very, they're not particularly meaningful. They're, gender mix, it doesn't really tell you much about culture or diversity and inclusion. So we do have work to do on that, and we need to get on with that in the next couple of months. Okay, no problem. Yeah. And that's not due for another couple of months anyway, I believe. Okay, so that's action log, that's fine. And then the next item, which is a report from myself, not much to say, other than the fact that we've had 2 board development meetings since the last board meeting. The first of those was focused mainly on the new plan, the new IMTP, and the second meeting we had yesterday, which was looking at the new legislation on duty of care and duty of candour, and also the anti-racist issues as well, which is clearly a very important issue within the trust. So that's all I want to say. So I'm going to pass straight on now to Jason, if I may, and Chief Executive Report.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Can I start with a couple of items that don't appear in the report, and then, as usual, I'll cover off 3 or 4 salient points from the report and happy to take questions. The first one, prior to the report, is I just want to, I guess, alert the board or remind the board that one of our colleagues, Hugh Phillips, who worked latterly in the operational delivery unit, sadly passed away recently. His funeral will be on Friday this week. We're expecting quite a large attendance from colleagues across the organisation, given Hugh's length of service and the various teams that he had worked in throughout his service with us. So I think, Chairman, if we may just take a moment to pause and reflect on the sad loss of a colleague, Hugh Phillips. All right. And then the second item, prior to commencing a quick run through of the usual report, is to alert the board to the fact that the King has graciously admitted 2 colleagues to the Order of St John. That's Aaron Roberts and our very own Director of Operations, Lee Brooks, sitting here with us this morning. So congratulations to both Aaron and Lee. The investiture for those honours is in the coming months, and both Aaron and Lee will clearly be attending that, so that's good news. Then if I can turn to the report, if we can turn to paragraph 9 first, and the subsequent paragraphs across the estates update. I just want to, I guess, draw this out because there is a lot of work going on across our estate, both the corporate estate and also the operational estate. And you can see listed paragraph 15, a number of schemes which have completed during this current financial year. And there, of course, as you can see here in the list, not just in the operational estate, but also, not just in the corporate estate, but a number of enhancements and improvements across the operational estate too. And I think it's right just to recognise the hard work of what is a relatively small team in Chris's directorate, the estates team, for the significant work that they have delivered this year, and of course in previous years as well. Given we have over 100 sites or points of presence across Wales, it's a never-ending process of refurbishment, upgrade and replacement. But the work they do is significant, and of course improves the environment for all of our people, be they in corporate roles or in operational roles. Then if we can fast forward to paragraph 63, which appears on page 11. This is just to draw out the great work that has been recognised here with colleagues working in our end-of-life care team. You can see here an update around the just-in-case medications, which we introduced on our vehicles a number of months ago, a development which has now been adopted by a number of other services across the UK, and also an update here on the fact that the palliative care paramedics working in health boards has proved very effective to the extent where the numbers that we've deployed across into health boards in partnership with their community palliative care teams has increased to 10, which is good news. Thirdly, if I can take you to 71, just draw the board's attention to the deployment of robotic process automation, or robots, in some of our more manual kind of administrative roles. You can see here a cost avoidance or a saving as a result of that. And whilst we have limited capacity in the RPA or in the robots at the moment, there is certainly, I think, further scope for us to develop that. So good development, and I'm pleased that we've finally got this in working after some time. Penultimately, 75. Board would have heard about this in a number of other discussions in other places, but we have now submitted a business case to commissioners for what is noted here as an amber virtual ward. It won't be called a virtual ward. I think, Liam, we're clear on that. In the future, it's not going to be called a virtual ward, but it will be something developed in phases or stages over time. And whilst we are yet to receive a formal response to that business case, that has been developed collaboratively with commissioners and with government at the request of Welsh Government, and therefore we're expecting a positive outcome in the coming weeks. And then finally, Chairman, before I take any questions, if I can take us to paragraph 80, this talks about development for colleagues in the 111 service, and I'm pleased here to see that we've supported master's level education in remote clinical decision making for colleagues in the 111 service, and you can also see that other work with HEIW continues to develop a framework for colleagues in that specific service. So really pleasing to see development activity and support for colleagues in the 111 service now starting to bite. So I'll pause there and happy to take any questions on the report as usual.
Thanks, Jason. Very comprehensive written report as always. You've pulled a few highlights from it. Any questions from board members?
Thank you, Chair. Just two quick comments first before my question, if I may. So just touching on paragraph 64, I'm very pleased to see that we've appointed some additional palliative care paramedics, because we know from experience that work is having huge benefits. So delighted to see that progressing. Secondly, then, paragraph 69 and 70, which refers to staff winning the first awards at the first ever prompt award. So that's lovely, really. Huge congratulations to both those staff members. My question, if I may, is relating to paragraph 46, Chair, and that's relating to the recent meeting whereby the director, Estelle, Director of Partnerships and Engagement, along with colleagues from Strategy Planning and Performance Directorate, met with individuals to share the engagement framework. And I was just wondering, was there any particular feedback that came from that meeting that would be of interest or helpful for the board to be made aware of?
Okay. Estelle, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, so we met, as Bethan outlines, we met with the Consultation Institute, as I said I would, following the last board in January, to sense check really the content of the framework, to make sure that it was aligned. There was some feedback. The most helpful one, I think, was around, and we'll probably get onto this in the future, but around the governance of the programme and the engagement. You know, who is the organisation consulting? I think it's very clear it is us, but it was just having that sense check about you know, working out the route where your information comes in, where is it reviewed, how do we feed that through into the process as we're starting to evolve our thinking and making sure that stuff is reflected. Rachel, I don't know if there's anything you want to add there, but I think it was a valuable conversation, Beth, and we've also got now some further opportunities to engage with the Consultation Institute as we move forward, to make sure that at every point we are sense checking what we are doing, and we're not going, you know, A, off on tangents, or B, exposing ourselves to any undue risks. So yes, I think it was valuable, and they are keen to work with us on it, so that's good.
Thank you. I think that's really good to hear, because this is such an important piece of work for us, isn't it, moving forward in terms of our engagement. So that's great. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? No? Good, thank you very much. In that case, we'll move on. That paper was to note, which we duly do. Next item on the agenda are questions from the public, if we have any, Estelle.
Actually, we don't, Chair,
Okay.
at the minute. My team will actively monitor Facebook as we're streaming live, and any questions that come in during the course of the meeting, we'll note those and we'll provide responses in a different format.
Good, okay, thank you very much. In that case, we can move on again. The next item we're actually deferring till after break, which is the staff story. So we're going to hold that until after the break. So we'll move on then to item 9, which actually is back with you, Jason, if that's okay. Your paper on the mitigating actions, or the actions for mitigating harm.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'll perhaps ask for assistance from Rachel on this. The board would have seen this paper on a number of occasions before, and this seeks to provide an update on the actions both already in hand and some new actions underway. I won't talk through the detail of the body of the paper, save to say that the current position, and Lee, you might want to offer some comment on this. The current position in terms of handover delays is of concern. I mean, it's been of concern, obviously, for a very long time, but it's of perhaps increased concern to us this month, because we are essentially in a position where we were in December, with the number of long waits that we're seeing at emergency departments, and also the totality of the losses which are occurring. And of course, that is despite good improvement in Cardiff and the Vale Health Board. So nationally, the picture is the same as it was in December, but underneath that, we've got improvement in Cardiff and Vale, quite significant improvement at Cardiff. Now, whilst we haven't got the very extreme waits in the community currently that we saw in December, that's largely because activity is lower than it was in December. And if we look at red performance, for argument's sake, for this month, we're something in the order of the high 40s, and the amber median somewhere around 3 hours. Not as bad as we were in December, because activity is lower than it was. So I'll bring in Rachel, if I can, Chairman, to talk through the latest set of actions in the table, the supporting table to the paper, and then Lee, if we have time, may want to comment a bit more on where we are with the operational picture and the current handover delays.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think in terms of the action plan, which sits underneath the S bar, most of these actions you'll have seen in the last paper and in fact, the kind of progress against most of them is consistent in the sense of the ones that we are in control of, we've made really good progress on, and unfortunately, there are some reds in there which are largely those ones which are related to handover delays or other actions which sits kind of outside of our control. There are a couple of new actions in here, and I think it is important to just note, I suppose, that as an executive team, this is never a finished process at the moment. There is always a discussion, you know, within our meetings around, you know, what more can we do to try and mitigate some of these harms. So we picked up, or Jason just picked up in his report, virtual wards or whatever, you know, that subsequently to be called something else. That's a new, you know, piece of work that has emerged in the last couple of months as a reaction to, you know, we've got to try and find a better way of managing safely the patients in our care, as they call us. But you can see some further actions coming through. So I'm just thinking particularly around actions 23 and 24 here, where we're looking at some of the red calls as well, acknowledging that a lot of the harm comes to patients in the amber category, but actually how we manage red can improve red outcomes, but also, you know, potentially release some resource to respond to other types of calls. So we're looking at, for example, in 24, potential to consider how, you know, what resource we deploy to red calls. So we know that for many red calls we need multiple attendants, and that's right, and that will continue. But actually there are some red calls who just need the nearest emergency ambulance, and that's, you know, they don't need 4 or 5 ambulances to go to them. And in differentiating that response that still gets to them within 8 minutes, it does free up potentially some capacity to then be able to respond to other patients, other amber calls, for example. And then we're also having a look at particularly breathing problems, where we know we did a really comprehensive piece of work recently, which said that actually when you look in retrospect at a lot of the breathing problems, many of them aren't red calls really when you look at them. Obviously that, you know, from an NPDS perspective, that doesn't differentiate. So we're thinking about how we could move some of those calls really quickly across to a clinician, get the wheels rolling so that we're still, you know, on, you know, getting ready to move and get there if it is a red, but a clinician have a very quick view as to whether in fact the clinical sense is that it is a red or not. And so those are things which again are will help to release resource, I think, to then respond more appropriately and more quickly to some of the amber calls. So I won't call out any further actions because most of the rest of them are the same, but with an update against each of them if anybody's got any questions. But it's, as I say, just really the key for me is to be assured that we are kind of continuing to work at you know, trying to find new ways or different ways of improving this situation.
Absolutely. Lee, did you want to sort of add any comments?
If I can, Chair, please, and if it's okay to indulge me, recognising that there will be some natural overflow with the risk item,
yes,
which 223. So I might take some of the time now.
Yes,
I won't need it later.
yes, that's a good idea.
So earlier this month, so each month I share some data with the chief operating officers in relation to the impact of waiting time, so the impact of handover delays on community response. And when I shared the data for February earlier this month, I did raise in that exchange, I was growing concern in relation to what I was seeing for March.
This is the chief operating officer.
This is the chief
in the hospital trusts.
Correct, Chair. Yes, in the health boards. And so. And in preparing today and taking a look at some of the data, I think my concern was well placed. So recognising that our health boards committed to a 25% reduction in lost hours and an eradication of the 4-hour or longer handover delays, it's been interesting for me to do some number crunching and take a look at what's been happening at the average daily lost hours. So recognising that December was our worst month on record, around 1,000 hours on average per day. As we move through January, that reduced to 738, into February reduced to 665. Now, it's really important that we don't get lost in what happened in February, because the reality is that that was reduced because of the specific attention to the industrial action days, where handover delays were greatly reduced on those days. March to the 27th, so recognising this is not verified, but I've got good confidence in the data I've pulled, the average is at around 908 hours. And so this is therefore beginning to reflect a pressure upon ambulance that is similar to that we were facing in December, which was, of course, our worst on record. In terms of the 4-hour delays, on average, in December, 95 daily, down to 65 in January, down to 59 in February, 91 in March to the 27th. And so there is not an indication that from a handover perspective, the actions, impact from actions appears to be somewhat limited. And I do agree with Jason. I think that the degree of harm is likely to be less than December because activity is more favourable, but harm is inevitable in this situation. The other element, just to draw out as well on this, Chair, relates to, again, one of the risks, which for me would be our ability to provide our predetermined response if there's a major incident or a mass casualty incident that occurs. Now, in terms of forming our risk, of course, we've been waiting for assurances from health boards. Now, for me, my concern in relation to this risk, unfortunately, is growing, because whilst commonly we're seeing between 40 to 50% of our ambulance resources outside emergency departments unable to respond, at peak I have seen up to 60% of our ambulances. And some recent events that have occurred in Wales, so specifically we've had a fire on Ferry, and we've had the unfortunate house explosion. The response to those incidents, whilst we will draw out our learning through our regular debriefing process, what surrounds that does not build confidence in relation to ability to immediately, without delay, release ambulances to respond to patients who would need them. So it's really with regret today that I have to report that despite the efforts, and particularly the efforts from WAST in terms of shifting on the actions that have been set out, the reality is that we are not seeing tangible change in relation to the handover delays, hence the pressure that it applies back into ambulance service and hence community wait times. What I've just outlined is in the throes of a new correspondence that I intend to share with the Director of Ops and Chief Operating Officers more formally, probably today, following the informal raise of my worry earlier in the month.
Thanks, Lee. It's obviously it's concerning, and I suppose as a board we just have to always keep in our mind, or divide actions in my mind anyway, to those which really are under our control, which are limited, and those which are adversely impacted by the actions of others, i.e. the hospital trust, which we can't directly control. We can only shine a light on it, and we can only try to exert influence as much as we can. But it's a depressing picture that the hospital, having proved that things can improve during a time of difficulty, are now slipping back. So we've got a few questions. The Jogger, I think Martin came up first, and then Jogger, and then Beth.
I think we're doing everything we can, and a lot of this is out of our hands, I guess. But I was looking at the graph on page 5 of the main report. I just wanted to make a few comments. I mean, obviously, Betsy Cadwallader is way out of line, but they are by far the biggest trust, so I guess you'd expect them to be higher than the rest, but not maybe as high as this. But what's really interesting is Cardiff and Vale. And we talked about this last time. So there must be something that's happening in Cardiff and Vale that the others can learn from. And we noted last time, I think the Minister actually brought this to the attention of everybody, that, you know, why aren't you doing what Cardiff and Vale are doing, which is the obvious comment to make. Is there anything that we've learned from those conversations about what Cardiff is doing that the others aren't? Or that, you know, are they, what's different about Cardiff then that makes them such a good, well, relatively good performer when you look at this graph?
I'll start quite frankly in response, and then there may be some other colleagues who want to come in. I would, you're quite right in calling out that there has been an opportunity to share previously, and that opportunity was led by the Minister, at which colleagues, we saw a colleague from England with a very good handover position, share the steps that they had taken. And we also saw Cardiff and the Vale also share the steps that they had been designing and were intending to take, recognising that there was already some initial signals of improvement. So that sharing has already occurred. Now, what we are hearing from some of our health board colleagues is their desire to now visit Cardiff to see what it is that they've done. The point, however, for me is the sharing has occurred. The sharing has occurred. Now, there are absolutely steps that that the health board has taken in terms of its configuration, but there is also a very clear no tolerance
In Cardiff.
in Cardiff. So the health board was very assertive in its tolerance on 4-hour handover delays, and the health board is now really starting to stand out as it seeks to reduce that and take the steps to reduce that level of tolerance coming into April.
But there's nothing, this is more about understanding than questioning. It's understanding what Cardiff are doing. I mean, it'd be interesting to get some feedback about, I hear what you say about, right, tolerance levels being 0, if you like, in Cardiff. They're obviously not anywhere else. So this is about clinical activity, I guess, because you can't, I know, you can't as a board say, oh, we're not tolerating this. Right, let's move on to the next item. It doesn't work like that. There has to be changes. I mean, it could be things like, we won't look after our non-emergency patients. We will prioritize our emergency patients at the expense of waiting lists, for example. That's a positive action. So I was just wondering if we've got any, is that what's happening at Cardiff, or don't we know?
Can I let Jason come in? I know we've got others with hands up. I think Jason wants to just take up those points, and then we'll go to Jago and we go to
Yeah, I mean, I'll bring Liam and Brendan in on the what are they actually doing on the ground. But I think just to perhaps reinforce a couple of the points that Lee has made in response to you, Martin. So we began sharing best practice through EASC 3 years ago, and we brought in colleagues from the northwest region who had at that time been held out as an exemplar, and there were a number of steps or actions, if you like, measures that they'd taken across the region, which had enabled them to keep a lid on low delays in emergency department handover delays. More recently, as Lee mentioned, we brought colleagues in from the West Midlands and shared, they actually delivered a presentation to colleagues here in Wales on the approach that they'd taken, not too dissimilar to what we saw from the Northwest, and more recently, as has been said, Cardiff. Liam and Brendan will be able to talk much more about what they understand from their peers in Cardiff, but my take from discussion with chief exec colleagues and also with the director of nursing, the medical director, and the director of operations, or the COO in Cardiff, is the team is very tight. So they are tight as a quad, the 4 of them, in the expectation they're setting to their people, and secondly, they are clear that the risk which we hold in the community is a shared risk with the health board. So it's not something that they see as our problem with hundreds of patients waiting in the community for a very long time. They see that as their problem too, or our problem collectively. Whilst there are actions that they are taking, they are clearly, the actions they're taking are not without risk in the hospital, but they are doing it on the basis of balancing the risk, the overall clinical risk across the system, rather than holding it all in one place. Arguably, we would say, with us in the community, with lots of patients with no care and support around them. But Liam and Brendan might want to comment a bit more on the detail of what they're doing.
Okay. Can I just check, Jog, is that okay? If we, or would you do? Is that
My question was similar, and I got one other one after.
Okay, so we'll go with Brendan and Liam. Liam, do you want to come in?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things that are going on in it. I think Lee's right. There has been an awful lot of information sharing that has gone on, and talking to my peers, there's been a lot of visits that have gone on, and people are genuinely trying to think about how they take the learning and apply it into their own organisation. I think there was a joint peer network meeting about a month ago, which had the medical directors, the chief operating officers, directors of therapies, and exec nursing present. And there was a really strong presentation by the medical director of Cardiff Vale offered. and one of the terms that I took from that, and which I think we would all benefit from being able to apply in all of our settings, is right bed first time. And they are working really hard within Cardiff and Vale on right bed first time. So Martin, I think if I was to pick out the thing that is happening in the trust that is giving them the greatest productivity benefit to their organisation, therefore reducing length of stay, therefore creating capacity, and giving patients the best benefit in terms of outcome, and giving their workforce the best benefit in terms of looking after patients in an efficient manner, not having to trek around hospital trying to find them, it is the right bed first time mantra that they have built internally. They have got really strong clinical buy-in. So alongside particular leadership, I would comment on from Naku and the Director of Nursing, and sorry, the Medical Director, there's a really strong focus between them. It's daily. There is no gap. When things are tight and difficult, they stand by their people. They recognise the risk that is being carried. That there is two further points, I think. One is the data-driven insight within the trust. So they have a dashboard that is visible at all times, and they know where each directorate is at in terms of bed availability, but actually also importantly, they understand how they're performing against their own identified metrics. So the trust haven't placed metrics on them. The organisation, the directorates, the clinical people have identified the metrics that they want to deliver to. So there's a really strong data-driven intelligence model that supports the clinicians in understanding how they're delivering against plan. We have got a quid pro quo, and I hear this as well. I think Brendan's probably heard it in equal measure. They are carrying clinical risk inside the organisation to make this possible. And the clinicians who are leading on holding that risk are doing so because they recognise that holding that risk gives their community the best chance of success from us if something happens. And so the quid pro quo is that alongside the improvement in performance they deliver, that they have good access to resources within their community to meet the needs of their community. And that's where our codependencies on other health boards also plays a part, because from our perspective, it's trying to get to our REDs in particular at all times. So I think I hear really strong leadership, really strong connection through the organisation, a values-driven approach which genuinely is owned and across the organisation, but also in the same way we've been holding them to account, a little bit of a mirror for us in saying we're holding this, we're doing what you asked. Emergency consultants want to know that their families, emergency nurses want to know their families are going to be seen at the appropriate time when they need to call us as well. So there's a really good narrative across the organisation that I think helps.
It's not very reasonable. Do you get a sense whether they feel that they are getting that equal quid pro quo relationship, or is it too early to tell?
I think in fairness, it's too early to say, and there's been an awful lot of factors over the last month that have influenced our performance.
Brendan, did you want to?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. So the medical director of Cardiff and Vale was invited by the CMO to present to the medical directors a few months ago on what they were doing, following the concerns that I'd raised with Jason and Lee writing to Chief Execs and Coos. And I think it is a system change. There is a relentless pursuit of continuous flow across the system. So as well as reacting to the pressures in ED, they've changed some of the systems regarding primary care. So some of the ways in which the GPs are arranging admissions have been organised so that they get a better flow. Some of the scrutiny and some of the options other than EDs, Cardiff seems to be better at. Once the patients are in ED, they've obviously worked on the exit block from ED. Now, there have been several examples, including Walsall, Colchester, that have been raised across the UK. North Bristol was another one. And it's the continuous flow. So if you know you are going to have 48 patients going through ED in a 24-hour period, then if you're not doing 2 an hour, you need to be scrutinizing it at that point. And so rather than having these peaks and troughs, and we've seen it, the senior consultants come in and you see a peak in discharges and then it drops a bit. So it has to be continuous and has to go right through the wards, and there has to be continuous pressure at the back end on getting these patients out into supported communities. So that is basically what Cardiff are doing. And it is disappointing that this presentation was several months ago, supported by data that we provided, supported by data that I'd collected across the UK. And yet, earlier this week, I wrote out to the medical directors again. The response from Anira and Bevan was that their team is still working with Cardiff to look at how they can implement the same changes. The one fascinating thing that has come up in the last few weeks is the response to the junior doctors' industrial action in England. Because the junior doctors were out, all of the hospitals brought in the consultants to work on the front line. And I've spoken to several ED consultants who, met colleagues that they'd never seen before. That those hospitals suddenly had no ambulance waits. They had free beds flow through the system. Children coming in with rashes were seen by a consultant dermatologist within 20 minutes. The numbers of patients that were discharged rather than being admitted was phenomenal. The change in the way in which requests were processed through the system rapidly moved up. Now, obviously, that's not sustainable. But the one thing it did highlight was the importance of getting senior clinical hands-on, eyes-on with these patients as quickly as possible in the system. And unfortunately, in some of our systems, we seem to have junior doctors working to the best of their capability, but obviously the back end isn't there, and that is not producing the same results. So, yeah, I think there are several things that they can go at. It is disappointing that they haven't been able to pick up at pace the changes that Cardiff have made and learned from those lessons.
Thanks, Brendan, for putting that into stark sort of illumination, really, I suppose. Shocker.
Thanks, Chair. It was the same point I was going to raise as Martin on that, and it's really good to see that actually we're doing everything we can to try and improve at our end, but there are lessons learned behind the scenes and some things happening with the other health boards. But that was the same point I wanted to raise. In addition to that, the other one I wanted to ask you, Lee, was with the critical incident and what you flagged up there. I know recently that the house explosion. Are we carrying out some form of analysis of our response time to that, where there's lessons learned, anything we can do different to implement or have a further contingency in place, bearing in mind we know the backdrop of the kind of the handover delays?
So the simple answer is yes. So every incident of that nature, particularly where there's an incident declaration, will be debriefed, and those debriefs will come through with recommendations. And I'm sure we learn something from every event. I just want to emphasise, I don't have a specific concern in relation to the two events. For me, what they highlight is the potential and the what if scenario. And the reason why I called those events out is because these events may occur in Wales, and we have an obligation as a Category 1 responder to respond while sustaining our other services. My concern is that with regularly 40 to 50% of our emergency ambulances, and have seen up to 60% of our emergency ambulances, frankly, trapped at the emergency department, my concern is our ability to meet those legal obligations, to provide the initial response whilst sustaining our other services to the people of Wales. And we have to be confident, we have to be assured that if there is such a declaration, those emergency ambulances will be immediately made available to respond to people who will drastically need them.
Just on that point, Richard, that was kind of the area I'm going down, is that you've had an actual real life incident. We got stats of how we responded, what happened, is sharing those with the health board and saying, well, look, this could have been improved had those delays not happened. And I think for us, and I appreciate some of this is forward thinking and beyond our control, but it's sharing that data with the health boards, having a conversation, saying, well, we've done everything we can. This is where we need your assistance.
Yes, I can give you assurance that will occur off the back of the debriefing. Yeah.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Chair.
Would the immediate release protocol come into play in those circumstances?
Yes, so this in essence is immediate release on steroids.
Yes,
It won't be please release this one ambulance to go to this one patient. It will be release them all to go to many patients. And so the principal, Chair, the same, yes.
Okay. Right, we've got Bethan, I think, and also Hannah coming in a second, but Bethan next.
Thank you, Chair. I think most of the key points have been made. However, there are some really stark numbers in this report. And, you know, Lee has already shared with us the numbers in this report. They've deteriorated since then, because this report provides us numbers for February, and March is back to the trend that it was in December, which is the worst on record. And this is so concerning. So, you know, specifically, we talk in the report around the immediate release directives, as you were just asking about, Chair. And for the Amber 1 category, only 76 were accepted and 90 were declined. So we're declining more. Our partners are declining more than they are accepting. Now, we know harm occurs to people in the Amber 1 category when those release requests or directives are declined. You know, the impact on patients in communities across Wales is significant. It's ongoing. It's escalating again now. So we had a little bit of an improvement in January and February. Although those numbers were dreadfully poor, there was an improvement. The handover waits over 4 hours, as the report says, 1,586 people waited over 4 hours in February. When you think about that number, that's astronomical, and it's almost unthinkable. And I think if I wasn't a part of WAST, I probably wouldn't believe that was happening. Not for those people that are really poor, really poorly, really sick. I was struck by the comment you made, Liam, around Cardiff, you know, and one of the things you said was they've decided that they will hold the risk. They recognise that is the best for their communities, because this is about partnership, this is about shared responsibility and accountability. Another figure, just one final figure, you know, in the report, 28,252 people waited over an hour outside an ED department, and we're estimating just under 3,000 of those will have come to severe harm. We talk about these things constantly in Quest. Most of our reports that we receive at the Quest committee meetings relate to our 2 highest risks, which, as Lee said, I think a lot of the discussion we could have had in the risk management report we're having now. We talk about risks 2 to 3, 2 to 4 throughout Quest. And I continue to be more and more amazed every time we talk about another report in another meeting, because it's almost unbelievable. I guess the final point I wanted to make was 2 points, really. My fear, as board members will know from previous conversations, is these figures are figures that trip off our tongue now quite naturally. We talk about these significant numbers all of the time when we talk about impact on patients in the community, specifically relating to risks 2 to 3 and 2 to 4. And we cannot become complacent, and you would understand if we did, simply because these are figures that are very natural to us. We talk about them constantly, and as you do that, there is a risk that suddenly the impact of the data you're talking about becomes less. We cannot allow that to happen. We really cannot. And for me then, the final point is, we talk about the impact on patients, and first and foremost, that's our priority. We're here to serve and support people in the communities. However, the very real and tangible impact on our staff, who day in, day out have to work in these circumstances, knowing they cannot respond to people in dire situations. You know, one of your final comments in presenting the report, Rachel, was, are we assured that we are doing all we can in WAST? And I think we are, and I think we talk about that every Quest meeting, as you know, and we always get to that position. We are assured that we are doing all we can. I guess my challenge back to all of us is, is there anything at all else that we can do to try and drive forward this change in the system? I'm pretty confident I know the answer, and it's a no, other than continuing to do everything we have been doing for many months.
Thanks, Beth. And I mean, I think you're right. I mean, we've got to keep shining the light on it. It's frustrating that so much of it is outside of our hands. It is worth, while I think just reporting that this conversation that we've had and the concerns that we have, flow right the way out through the Welsh Government's Health Minister, and we see questions being asked in the Senate about it as well. So this is an issue which has got a spotlight being shone on it at the highest level. It does seem to be a somewhat intractable problem within the health trusts, although, as Cardiff is showing, and as Brenda was saying, there are a number of hospitals around the country which do seem to be addressing the risk issue, the balance of risk issue, and doing things internally to make things easier. So one has to hope that what is happening in Cardiff will gradually kind of percolate down to other trusts. Jason, you wanted to come in, and then I'll come to you, Han, if I may. Just let Jason respond.
Can I just say,
Sorry, I'm sorry.
It's all right, no problem.
I mean, it's along a similar vein to the comments you just made, Chairman. I mean, I suppose just to rehearse, some of the things we have done, as we touched on earlier, we've brought in learning from other places where, we know that the actions and the measures they've taken have delivered improvement. We've sought to share that over a number of years now with colleagues across health boards using the EASC mechanisms. We've escalated through government on a number of occasions. There's correspondence both from me to chief executives directly, raising concern about the risk that we're carrying and our inability to respond. There's correspondence to the Director General and the Chief Executive of NHS Wales over 24 months probably, raising the risk and signalling grave concern that we as an executive and a board hold about our inability to respond. We've obviously seen the Health Minister convene an event with chairs and chief executives in the last 6 months or so, where her expectations were set very clearly about delivering on the 25% reduction against the October, I think 21 base. I think it was October 21 baseline, and the 4-hour backstop. And subsequent to that, there's also been further attempts to share learning from Cardiff with others, and of course a number of actions which we're taking, either to prop up or boost production, or defray activity away from the need for a response, such as the increased hear and treat rate. And it's important we remember the efficiency target that was set for us was 10.2% of daily volume being closed by way of hear and treat now consultant club. We're at 15% now. We've got an ambition to stretch that to 17 this year. So there is a lot we are doing to try and defray activity away from the need to respond, or prop up production, put more ambulances on to respond. But of course, that increased capacity essentially is joining a queue. And if we think about what's happened as a result of the roster change, we've moved from at peak roughly 130 ambulances a day across Wales nationally prior to October last year with the old rosters, to about 170 at peak now, during the week. So 40 odd more ambulances at peak across Wales as a result of the roster change and the reconfiguration we've done. They're joining a queue. So there's quite a lot that we have done internally to make ourselves more efficient, or manage activity in a different way. And of course we have, escalated using the mechanisms that exist, be that EASC, accountable officer, correspondence, or other fora. But it's not landing. It's not landing.
Yeah. Okay. It's also it's also worth remembering there are other things that we're doing as well, with the chariot vehicles, with more work with community first responders, advanced paramedics coming out of training, and so on. So there are things in our control which we're doing, and a lot of those are identified in the paper as things which are in progress. But their impact is quite small compared with the major impact of the hospital delays, of course. So we're on that kind of treadmill pedaling faster and faster uphill as the hill seems to get a bit steeper every day. Anyway, I'm sorry. So Kerry's going to come in a second, but Hannah, you've been very patient.
So my question relates to something slightly different. So I don't know if you needed to pick up on something that was part of the current conversation. No, you're okay. I was very interested to see the modelling around the same day emergency care provision and the potential that that could have a sort of 5% percentage point impact on RED performance, and then was quite struck that less than a 0.25% of the demand is currently being funneled there. I know that WAST is one of the providers that has referral rights into that system. I wondered if I could just ask if we know what the delay is or what the blockage is in terms of rolling out these same-day emergency care centres, and whether there's anything that we can be doing from our end to influence the progression rate.
Absolutely. And the reason I was smiling and Jason was talking to me was because I had a conversation with Andy about this very question only last week, I think it was, and the answer was very illuminating. So maybe Andy, I could ask you to give a.
Yeah, I mean, it is a frustration of me, and it's one of the things that myself and Liam and Brendan talk about on a pretty much all of us talk about this on a frequent basis. The way we work together on the setting up of the SDEX and the access to that is probably where up as an exemplar process as to how we should do it. So we work for a number of months, led by colleagues within the health board in terms of creating a methodology and what we would refer which patients were suitable to go in. And so there was a significant amount of work going on before the SDEX went live as to what would be the criteria that our staff would use to get into the SDEC. And what became clear as those SDECs started to open is that criteria we worked on, nobody was applying. And we're still getting to the bottom as to why that access isn't like we'd envisioned it would be. And we probably have as clear an idea now as to what there is. Some of that is around there's some risk aversion within the receiving departments that they simply want to keep the risk very low, where I thought we already had fairly low risk patients going in there. But also what we're also seeing is because of the pressures we're seeing in other parts, such as ED, is that sometimes this SDEX become an overspill from ED. So we had an example of one of my team that spent 2 days working outside the SDEC, testing out as to could he get people in through the doors. And what was clear on day one of there, he failed, didn't get a single patient through. The vehicles were queued outside, lots of suitable patients in the queue. Tried to refer from the car park out ED into SDEC, even the crew had already tried, failed. Started the next day. And went to pay it a visit. And as he entered the department opened at 10 o'clock that morning. As he walked in at 10 o'clock, it was already full. And it's only just opened now. We managed to fill it literally within minutes of the doors opening. And it was ED patients that had been bedded down the night before that were there. So they started the day, in a deficit position. So nobody was going to come through. So there's lots and lots of images of that, and it goes back to Liam's point earlier around the first bed, right bed first time. Yeah. Because if all we're going to do is fill up other parts, yes, that solves a problem at that moment in time, but all that does is then create a knock on and a knock on and a knock on, and so there is so many layers to this one that we're just kind of starting to get that insight into. But I think as the report illustrates, there's so much potential within SDEC about the capacity that will increase.
And so how are we moving that forward at the moment?
So there's a lot of this within the 6 goals programme that we're highlighting. That there is the clinical professional advisory group that I sit on as well, and these are being brought forward at that point and illustrating. Look at the lack of the potential we have in the system. If we can just kind of solve this, but it's it wrapped up into that. Let's have the learning coming from Cardiff. I think is probably the way forward.
Thank you.
Another example of something that we can influence, but sadly can't control. Kerry, we get to you last. Sorry it's been so long.
So it's a hard report, isn't it? There's, when we see in Quest the harm that's coming from this, as Bethan said, I'm assured that we're doing all that we can. My question was around the IMTP process, and in terms of some of the priorities we're talking about, handover delays, immediate release, and SDEX, are they going to feature in the health board? So I appreciate this isn't our remit, but will those priorities be featuring in those IMTPs? Because my worry is, you know, with austerity and, you know, the financial challenges that we're going to face, that, you know, God forbid this could get worse. You know, we're seeing that trajectory. So from my perspective, you know, the IMTP and being reflected as a priority in that at least gives me some assurance that it's going to remain a high priority.
Rachel, I think, is better placed to talk about the ICAP process, I would have thought.
Well, actually in the IMTP process as well. So if I just start with the IMTP, so we'll mention it in our IMTP report, but there is a requirement from the Minister to complete, as well as doing your normal report, to complete a specific template on a range of her own priorities. And one of those is handover delays. So each health board will be required to fill in quite an extensive template on specifically what they are doing on reducing handover delays. And that, you know, goes right through, you know, what they're doing in terms of workforce, what they're doing in terms of, you know, how they're using digital, what they're doing in terms of, you know, how that affects their resourcing, what are the outcomes they're looking for. So it's a really quite detailed template, and the Minister will read all of those templates from every health board. She read everybody's IMTP last year and found it difficult to pick out from them the things that she was particularly interested in or wanted to see evidence of. So that's why she's mandated this. So there are a range of templates. That's not the only one. And you know, there's one on cancer. There's one on planned care. There's one on access to primary care, how people are going to improve. So the templates cover a lot, but there is one very specific one about improving handover. And one of the things Jason just mentioned there is that we've got the ICAP process. So that is set via the EASC mechanism as part of the EASC IMTP, which we then contribute to. And that is a requirement for every health board to work with us locally to develop an action plan locally with us on how to improve handover delays. And you know, our contribution to that is some of that inverting the triangle stuff, you know, where we can talk about doing things differently in that local area. So there's a kind of the very high level, there's the local level, you know, more detailed. And why I put my hand up, Chair, earlier, just as I was listening to this conversation, was just I wondered whether how strong we want to be in our IMTP. So in our IMTP, we mention obviously that it's a big pressure on us, and that, you know, our response is the inverting the triangle program, where we think we can do something quite different, but we don't call out very loudly, I suppose, you know, health boards, we want you, we need you, we want you to do something. We do mention it, but it's that kind of sense of we could emphasize that more and pull that out more or not.
Well,
so that's a consideration.
Yeah, we've got the IMTP
Yeah.
to be approved today.
Yes,
so I don't think
right,
I don't think it's a bit late to change that, but I think, you know, there are some issues that we're talking about. Angie, you hand over. Can I just reinforce the point that is aware the Minister last year set 8 priorities. This year she's setting 6 priorities, and one of those specifically encapsulates handover delays. Delayed transfer of care is her #1 priority, which is really, as Brendan was saying earlier on, if you can get that right, then the flow starts, and then, you know, everything kind of hopefully falls into place a little bit better as a result of that. So, you know, she is setting these priorities right across the system for our colleagues in the other trusts. So, you know, we can be assured of that. Angie, and then we'll come back to Brendan. Then we probably ought to move on really to other items.
Thank you, Chair. And it was to come back to your point, Bethan, and I would about, you mentioned about our staff. So I just wanted to give you that reassurance. I think through our WAST Lives, where we do our open sessions, we've tried to make sure our colleagues can see we are listening and we are escalating and we are sharing with them what we are doing to escalate the issue of handover delays, but also in our people priorities for the IMTP this 23-24, we're focusing on overruns in particular. So that challenge for our colleagues who are outside an ED where they can't get off shift, and all of those extra, you know, challenges for them. So it's a real commitment to us that there may be some things we can't control, but those things we can, we are absolutely determined we will do something about. So I just wanted to give that reassurance.
Okay, and Brendan, just final word on the subject, I think.
Yeah, it's just at a national strategic level, because picking up on what Andy was saying, of course, we do have a national programme, which is the 6 goals, which is meant to be driving this work, and all of the aspects of that we've spoken about clinically, the primary care, the ED delays, the handover delays, the discharges back into the community. They all fall under some aspect of the 6 goals work, and I don't know. I don't see the urgency that we feel being translated into that national strategic work. I can imagine, there are some parts of the UK where if these delays were being seen, there would be weekly, if not daily meetings with correspondence flowing back from the board with direct actions. But in Wales, it seems that the actions somehow end up being filtered down to each health board to do something that's not given the same strength of direction that I've seen when parts of England, for example, have faced this sort of problem. So I think there is something that we need to do collectively to link in and help 6 Gold drive some of this work.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right, Brendan, and that sort of falls to Jason and I and our sort of colleagues who interact with the ministers and interact with the Welsh Government to keep making those points, which we will certainly do. All right, we'll move on if we may. We spend a lot of time on this topic, but it's really important that we do, because they are our 2 highest red risks, the handover delays and the delays in the community. So it's absolutely right that we spend a considerable amount of time focusing on these. It was also going to be, it still will be in part, but it was also going to be a major part of the risk element in terms of reviewing how we are reviewing, but I think we've more or less done that, so we will catch up a little bit with the time when we get to that point, I guess. Okay, you're looking at me best, certainly. Oh, good. I worry when you look at me sternly. Good. Okay, so in that case, we will move on. What we asked to do, by the way, on that paper, which we've done, really, we've noted it, and we've considered all of the actions that we required that are going on, so we've done that. So we're now going to another very important item, because this is the duty of candour and duty of quality, which is new legislation, which is about to become law across Wales. So Liam, the floor is yours. So
yeah, and it's almost a perfect lead in from Brendan's final comments. Actually, I think we might have planned it. So the duty of quality is the new legislation that comes into place on the 1st of April, places additional duties on a number of parties to the NHS. Specifically, it also places additional duties to the Minister. And so looking for the improvement trajectories that are set out in the priorities will be something we'll all be keenly monitoring. And subsequently, as part of the legislation, I'm sure we'll be wanting to see how they're enabled. I'd like to thank the board for the board development session participation yesterday. I think we had an awful lot of discussion. We spent quite a lot of time yesterday working through where we are as a trust in our preparedness for the new legislation and identifying the areas that we need to do additional work on. So, Chair, what I will do is take the paper as read. I will take us to the recommendations, which are that we receive the report, we acknowledge the work that we still need to do, and I ask the board to do that in the context of our development session, and note that we will be submitting a baseline assessment in line with Welsh Government requirements in April and in September. So I'm really happy to talk to anything in the report, but I think there's probably been quite a lot of discussion in this space already.
Good. Thanks, Liam. You're quite right, and for the benefit of anybody who's dialing in and watching the board, just to re-emphasise that the non-execs and the execs, we met at the board development day yesterday. We spent a long time talking about this and discussing the consequences and any responses that we might make. So it has been an issue which has been well discussed right across the trust, and I think we're in reasonable shape to face the new legislation, although there are still some uncertainties about how exactly it's going to be implemented and the consequences for resources and other things across the trust. But I guess that's always the case with new legislation. So bear in mind that we have had a deep dive on it yesterday. Are there any other questions anybody wanted to ask Liam? Good, Beth then. Excellent.
Thank you. No questions, just some comments. Just as you've already said, and as Liam said, we had a really lengthy discussion yesterday, which I certainly welcomed because it was a good follow-on from the conversation we had in the Quest meeting early in February, where at that point we recognised we still had a fair way to go. So yesterday we could see and we were assured the further progress has been made, and obviously that's great to see and we welcome that. It's not going to be without its challenges. So I just wanted to formally acknowledge at the Trust Board today, really, the moving forward, this remains one of our 2 key priorities for this year at the Quest Committee. So we will keep a very close eye on this in terms of progress. And as I think we touched on yesterday, I think it was Liam that mentioned it, I guess we don't really know how ready we are until we start, until we get into it now in just a few days' time. But I think yesterday's session was very helpful, so I welcome that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Beth. Yes. Okay.
Just a quick point, and apologies, I should have asked it yesterday, but when I was reading this, my reflection was, when do we think we're going to see our performance report reflect our obligations in the Act? Do we need to shift that, and what's the timeline for consideration and acting upon that? I don't know whether that's a Liam or a Rachel question.
Well, but both probably, isn't it? I'd say. I mean, it's. I think you said yesterday, didn't you, Liam? We have done quite a lot of work in terms of bringing some of those quality metrics into the MIQPR through the last year to combine them. But I think we were just chatting over email last night. That we're re-establishing those quality performance management kind of collective discussions to try and bring some of that together. I don't know, Liam, you've got a view of a time frame you're looking for.
No, so I think we capture the metrics at the moment that would demonstrate we're cited on the quality of care that we deliver, and we're cited on the areas where we might want to seek improvement, and we through both the MIQPR and other reports that we generate. I think what we're looking at with the quality and performance management framework that the board's previously approved, and is how do we now move that forward. And I think colleagues around the board will recognise the last 4 to 6 months have been particularly challenging, and we acknowledge that that's where that work should come through. That group hasn't met, this group 6 underneath it hasn't met in the last 3 months due to the competing pressures of the seasonal pressures and the industrial action pressures. So that group is being reinstated, and I think what I'd ask is that I come back to the board with an update when we've worked through how are we going to put this into some time signs. I'm comfortable we got the right content, whether we got it in the right way to demonstrate all of the duty requirements, I think is something we do need to win.
Okay, happy with that. Any other questions, comments to? No. Good. Okay, in that case, we can move on. We've received the report, and we know the trust is working towards the baseline assessment, etc. So that's good. Okay, so moving on to the next item 11, which is about risk. So I'm going to hand over to Trish to talk us through this.
Thanks, Chair. You'll have in front of you certainly updates since the last January meeting on the 4 highest rated risks. Due to some operational pressures that we've already heard of this morning, some of the others have not been updated, but their update is well underway now, ready for the next round of committee meetings and board meetings. It is expected that through that there will be some movement in risk scores now that they're being looked at afresh, as well as some additional risks. And Lee's already touched on the civil contingencies risk there, and there's also some coming through on decarb as well. So we'll see that in that next round. They've been articulated, but the controls and the actions have not yet been fully pulled out. The board will see in the audit committee AAA highlight report, which Martin Turner, as chair of that committee, will talk to, that it was agreed there that we're going to continue to have this standalone risk report at board, and that the board receives a bit more context about those at the moment 4 high rated risks. And you'll see in paragraphs 10 to 12 that we've put some more information around where they've had focus other than at this meeting. So you can see actually that they've had quite a bit of focus both at committee meetings and elsewhere, and also they are what really drives the agenda setting. So when we're setting agendas, we make sure that the agenda items go to those higher rated risks, both at this meeting and the committee meetings. And that the risks will obviously continue to receive detailed review and scrutiny in the committees that have remit over those risks, and they will report through their AAA report and including any escalations that are required. So we also agreed at Audit Committee that the owners of those higher rated risks, currently 4 risks, and the chairs of those committees where those risks were scrutinised will have an opportunity here at board to give a bit more information, possibly about any movement since the last review, but also some horizon scanning about what is likely to be coming up. And we've already had some extensive discussions about risk 223 and 224. Just for those who are viewing this, 223 is the Trust's inability to reach patients in the community, causing patient harm and death. 224 is significant handover delays outside the A&E departments, which impact on access to definitive care being delayed and affects the Trust's ability to provide a safe and effective service. And I think through the discussion that we've just had there, Liam and Lee's risks 223 and 224 have been pulled out in some detail. This report on the agenda here at item 11 also gives you some detail on the risk transformation program and the work that that's going into the IMTP, and that was also discussed at Audit Committee, and they'll keep an eye on its progress. So I'll stop there, Chair, and I'll give way to the risk owners and the chairs as well, particularly of 160 and 201, which is the sickness and the reputation risks.
Okay, Paul, do you want to say anything on those as the chair of the People Committee in the AAA?
Yes, I would, please, Chair. The other thing, and I was going to contribute to the last discussion, the handover delay issue, we look at it in PCC from a staff perspective. So one of the big issues that has been raised is this issue of the fumes, the diesel fumes. So you'll be aware that there's been some environmental surveys undertaken. There's a second stage to that we're currently undertaking. But the health and safety team presented to PCC the actions that they had taken. So for example, we've got a poster that's very clear about how you can mitigate against the risk of the fumes. Lee and I were just talking about the visits that some members of the board have taken to ED where you experience that. So it is a real issue. So we'll await further discussion and outcome of the surveys that have been undertaken at the second time. But just didn't want you to think that that risk and also the inability to reach patients in the community, we take a people perspective, because whilst we talk about a lot of our teams outside ED, there's a lot of people trying to answer telephones, seeing the stack change, the risk of patients. We are seeing that in terms of our turnover, our levels of anxiety and the wellbeing service. So there is a very clear people implication. So I just wanted to touch on those two, although primarily the request, but there is a people aspect to that. On the absence rates, we at every meeting we look at the absence management program. We have detailed discussion about the actions that are being undertaken. It's good to see, and you will see in further reports, that the sickness rate has reduced, which is very good. But there are some hot spots, and they've been identified, and again, local management teams are looking at why that is occurring and what's happening with them. The other thing that perhaps isn't so clear is in PCC, we also look at suspensions over 4 months, and sickness, absence over that period, and it was good to see that there's only one person in that category now. So it's having an effect across the organisation in terms of our people. So the high absence rates score will remain the same, but we will continue to monitor that through PCC. And I know that there's a report to EMT on a regular basis as well. In terms of the damage to the Trust reputation, again, that risk remains high because of all that we've talked about, the environment in which we deliver care. But we've also started to engage with PwC, looking at future engagement around inverting the triangle, and I've been involved in the discussions related to that, and it seems to be going quite well. We just need to make sure that the two come together, ensuring that there is consistency across the plan. So I don't know if Angie on 160 and Estelle on 201 want to say anything more.
Just in terms of sick absence, it was really positive to note at the meeting that for February particularly, and I just need to highlight it, we were at 8.4%, the lowest since May 2021. Now, we need to sustain that, we need to see it, but against a backdrop of winter pressures, industrial action, I do think it needs to be sort of acknowledged and recognised. And I feel confident that particularly, and I will reference the operational areas where we've done huge amounts of work in terms of working with our managers, working with colleagues to see this is not punitive, this is about being supportive, early access to wellbeing and mental health support. I do see some impact, but we have to keep on it and we have to keep supporting.
So I believe 5.9 is our target for next year. Something like that. No, I'm keeping.
That's the commissioner's perspective,
Okay.
but we have not said we've
Okay.
maintained our own trajectory, which is more like 6% by the
Okay.
end of
All right.
the year.
All right.
Not
Which
through
is
the
still
whole year.
huge.
5.9 and 6% are pretty close.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Okay. Sorry, no interruption.
I think we do need to recognise, sorry, Chair, that the environment in which our staff work, all the stuff we've talked about, the handover delays, the stack rising, has a huge effect on our absence rates. And we are looking at what we can do to mitigate that aspect.
And it's still, then we'll come to you.
Yeah, so just on the reputational stuff, it's quite interesting actually that we just had that conversation about impacts on workforce, because there are two quite distinct, I think, aspects to the reputation work. The reputation of our staff is very good. We are a trusted brand, and Liam will know from concerns with that there is seldom a concern about our staff or the quality of staff, etc. It is much more around timeliness of response, and again I won't rehearse that. One of the frustrations I suppose is all the things we've talked about have a cumulative impact on organisational reputation and indeed the reputation of the board. And we talked recently, last week, the execs did some development time of our own, and I brought forward some of the initial findings from the reputation audit, which will come both through execs in April and to PCC. And it's quite evident that we have some polarised views amongst our stakeholders. Some goodwill, some less. So that's quite interesting as we move through the stakeholder environment. Just yesterday, Jason and myself met with colleagues from Rhondda and Taff County Borough Council at full council. It was an extraordinary meeting of full council. And we were one of the main agenda items there. It's very clear that stakeholders with a community leadership role have concerns for the well-being of their population, understandably, are also keen to understand where we can work more collaboratively together and what we can do, which is a positive. But we are seeing some shifts in, I guess, tolerance from other stakeholders. So there is just we need to be mindful of all this, recognizing that whole environment within which we're working, and everybody is under pressure, but there is clearly a collective concern, as we've outlined here, for patients and members of the community in terms of what we are able to deliver in the current climate.
Indeed, of course. Liam.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just kind of pick up a point of clarification, if I may, with on Paul's commentary around the diesel fumes, because I think it's an important area that we recognise. Staff experience, staff concerns, their perception of what it might or might not be doing for them when they're in that situation of prolonged exposure. All of the surveys that we have done to date have demonstrated that we are below the legal limits in terms of exposure, and that the mitigation actions, if they were all put in place, would enhance further reduction in a number of site areas. So I just want to make sure what the clarification. So we're absolutely doing the work. We hear the concern, we recognise the concern that our staff are raising. We are taking all of the steps that Paul has alluded to are in place and will continue to be worked on over the coming period. But in terms of our legal duties, we are not reaching any limits that have been set in that space. And I think it's just an important clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. But albeit that it's a very unpleasant experience.
I agree.
So legally, yes, we might be
yes
fine, but actually, from a personal point of view, it's very unpleasant.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Yes.
I just wanted to ask a point on risk 260. So I completely understand that, you know, with the pressures, we've not been able to update all of this. But obviously, a potential cyber attack is quite serious for us. So I was just looking for some confidence that, you know, those actions are in progress and everything's okay in terms of that, you know, the cyber actions controls.
Leanne, you're the ideal person to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Kerry. So the actions that are listed there that you can see there has been progress against those that we've just not brought through the cycles of governance yet or been updated through. We know that people are our greatest asset in this space in terms of resilience and security. It was also one of the recommendations from the Audit Wales report that talked about shared responsibility. So our focus is very much on that awareness and education and training across the organisation. So this is reflected in the actions that are already there, but it's kind of our focus at the moment. So we are by way of update, we are implementing an information security policy management system, which will allow us to monitor the policy life cycles, measure understanding and monitor compliance against these. So this is just going through an internal policy group at the moment with look to push this out in the coming months or weeks or months. We're also alongside that implementing a cyber training and awareness module. So that will allow us to deploy ad hoc as and when we see necessary additional information, updates, training modules, but also allows us to activate bespoke training for individuals following phishing exercises that we deploy internally that allows us to kind of target and improve local understanding. So those would be the kind of two main updates there. Importantly, I guess one of our actions here is around the development of the KPIs. So that is in progress. The focus of those, especially initially, will be around the metrics of success of the training module and the policy management system, and bringing those through to Finance and Performance Committee in the following cycle. So we've got a lot in progress of other things as well, and we'll make sure those are updated for the next cycle.
Okay, good. Thanks very much. Later in the agenda, we've got the items where we look at the committee reports and we touch on the AAA reports, the escalation report. I think it makes sense actually to just do that now. So can I just check with you, Paul, whether there's anything you were planning on raising further in relation to your AAA report on risks or anything else from your committee?
Probably not on risk, but we spent a lot of time in the last meeting on the sexual safety and sexism survey. It was a really good meeting. I think everyone in the committee enjoyed the meeting. Not so much the subject, perhaps, but recognising it's really important. And I think we moved on from recognising that it was a survey in relation to sexism particularly, but it was a broader organisational discussion that we had. And what was really good, I think, is that there was clearly actions arising from that survey, and they are detailed.
Yeah, they're detailed in the report. Okay.
I think the other thing that we thought was very useful was the WASP highlight report that came to PCC, recognising that's been established, is now delivering. The slight change in the terms of references that came from PCC was about looking at WASP's contribution to added value rather than just receiving information about it. So we picked up that. We agreed a number of annual reports. So we looked at the gender pay gap report. Unfortunately, there has been some slippage in terms of we've deteriorated slightly, but again, had assurance from the team that work was underway to address that issue. We also had the annual equality report, which we approved and recognised that there's a new appointment being made, which hopefully will help us again on our journey around diversity. So there's a lot of detail. It was a very long agenda. It was quite a good meeting in terms of timekeeping. But I think the outstanding bit was the issue around the sexual survey. That was really, really powerful discussion. The one other thing that we did raise concerns about was the putting things right team, recognising the demands placed upon that team, as well as the other members of the staff, but particularly looking at that corporate directorate. And it again got assurance that things were being put in place to support that team better. We also looked at audit recommendations, both from the internal audit around managing absence, which we were pleased with, and also that a lot of the actions that came out of that report have already been undertaken. So we'll have further discussion about that in May. The recruitment, there was excellent recruitment of 100 staff, recognising we've got a huge turnover rate as well. So in terms of what we're pouring in, actually we're losing more going out for all the reasons we've discussed earlier. So I think that's the areas I would draw attention to. I don't know if Angie or Trish want to add anything to that.
Only one, which was we did do that initial sort of socialising of our new people and culture plan, which will be coming back in May.
Good, okay. The reason I link it is because obviously committees are owning risks.
Yes.
So it seems to make sense to, as we're talking about risk, and then we can kind of leave the risk discussion and get on to the other topics. So we've talked a lot about your risk, Bethan, in terms of handovers and delays. Is there anything else you wanted to, was there anything else in your AAA report which you would have normally referenced later in the agenda that you might want to just reference now? So
I
bring it
think
together.
so, please, Chair, if I can, in the highlight report. So in the alert section, there are only 2 items there, which we've discussed at length already. The first one is with regards to the impact on patients in the community, largely due to the handover delays. And the second one is the implementation, the duty of quality and duty of candour. So we'll labour on those points as we've had the discussions already. In the advice section, I mean, there are several reports that we've considered that we've logged under the advice section. The one point I would like to mention is, as always, the patient story we received was very, very powerful. So we heard from Lisa Taylor, whose late husband Spencer, our WISH team full of volunteers, gave them a day out and a set of memories that she will treasure for a long time. That was really, really impactful. And I think it touched us as committee members. I can see Paul nodding, he was at the meeting as well. You know, these are volunteers, our staff, who do this on a voluntary basis, and the impact of what they do and give of their time freely is significant and is palpable. It was a very, very powerful story. The other thing that I have to draw attention to, you know, Andy, we heard the Penthrox is on its way. It's been a long time coming, but I'm told it's closer now, we're nearly there. So we welcome that. Interestingly as well, at the end of the meeting, we had an agenda item, as other committees do, in terms of reflecting on how the meeting has gone. And that came out of the effectiveness reviews we've carried out. So that was interesting. And I think all of us as committee chairs will look to develop that discussion moving forward. In the assurance section, again, there are very many reports. As Paul said, for people and culture, the Quest committee was certainly robust and lengthy as always. One or two other things I'd like to draw attention to is we did receive our safeguarding annual report, which obviously is a very important document. And within that, we recognise that the volume of reports that our staff are making in terms of safeguarding alerts, we see that as a positive indicator. I think it's reflective of the increasing awareness amongst our staff and also their commitment really to try to do their very best for vulnerable people they come into contact with. So we welcome that. And obviously, as Trust Board colleagues will know, the Safeguarding Annual Report is included in the papers today. The MIQPR and the Patient Safety Highlight Report, other than the obvious performance issues there, we recognise there is some duplication and work is ongoing, certainly between Liam and Rachel and others, to try and streamline some of that moving forward. So we will welcome that when that comes along. Despite the challenges in the current pressures, there were lots of positives in those reports. You know, something Jason referred to earlier, which I'd noted, you know, the increase in consult and close cases. That's great. That's the direction we want to move in. So that was really good. There were several positives in the report. I'm happy to take questions on any of the others. Lastly, I want to draw attention to the PECI report. So historically, we've received those reports quarterly at Quest, and visually, they're really effective. They're jam-packed. They evidence all of the engagement work that our PECI team do across Wales. But moving forward, we are going to receive those reports on a biannual basis, and they're going to focus more on themes and trends, so we can take more of a bigger picture strategic view and try and pull themes out and focus perhaps on priorities for moving forward. The final part in the AAA report refers to the risks 2 to 3, 2 to 4, which we've discussed at length. So I'll stop at that point and open it up. Happy to take questions.
Can I just clarify, by the way, I've had my wrist slapped that it's the executives that own the risks and it's the committees that scrutinise the risks. I had one of those stern looks and a note. So it was serious mistake. Serious. Yeah. Thanks. There's only on a yellow one, unfortunately. If it's a red postcard, I'll just put that in bags. She's only got a few of those for real emergencies. Good. Thanks, Beth. Martin, did you want to, whilst we're going round this, and sort of, I know we're leaping to the bit at the end of the agenda, but it does make sense to we're talking about risks now, and your commission.
I think there are 2 points. One that's been touched on because it came up at the beginning of the risk discussion, really, and Trish talked about it. But it was an issue that I brought up at the last board meeting, and maybe even the one before that. And that was the issue of where the scrutiny and challenge happens for the higher risks. Now, what we've come to is a situation which I think is okay, and it was more or less talked about, Trish, by you in introducing the risk management paper earlier, and that is that the higher risks will be, as you said, owned by the executives and scrutinised in detail by committees, but that the opportunity at the board, this board, to talk about, discuss, hear about those higher, and particularly I think we picked on the 20 score and above, which is 4 at the moment. They get talked about here, but it's the formality, if you like, of the board receiving more information than it did in the past and more opportunity to discuss, as we did earlier, in fact, the issues that concern us. So that's happened, and I'm hoping the board will accept what is now going to be, we'll spend a bit more time on it, but that the main scrutiny is within the committee framework, and that the opportunity for us to have a broader discussion at the board is offered through the risk management report. So I think that's the good old-fashioned compromise, if you like, that keeps us all happy. The other one, though, that is related, and it's not for now, it's just probably to draw to the attention of the board, was the Audit Wales in their, was it their structured?
Yes, structured assessment. Yes.
Of non-executive director scrutiny. Just made a point, it was a sentence, in fact, that we all picked up on, I think, last time, was that there's not enough scrutiny, or I can't remember the exact word, I haven't got it in front of me, but that we could do more. This was aimed at non-execs, in my view. When we talked to, I probably got a name wrong. How do you pronounce Fleur? Fleur. I was corrected, Paul. Anyway, whatever her Christian name is, she is the lady who comes to our meetings and talks about all these reports. She is happy to come and talk to us directly as a board, probably not in this session, but about what she meant by that. Now, I think we recognise at Audit Committee that she has the opportunity to see all the boards in Wales, and is therefore offering some comparison, I guess, between us about the levels of scrutiny. And I think you've got the Betsy Cadwallader issue in the background, which probably influences certainly my reaction to those words, were that, yeah, we better find out what she means by this, so that it might be that some of the stuff we just talked about actually ticks that box. But let's get her along and listen to her directly, so that we're not trying to interpret what she means by that sentence. So that was the only other thing I wanted to draw to the attention of the board today.
That's good, and thank you. And you're right. And there is an invitation for her to come to a board development session or some other session, I think. So we'll explore it, because obviously we do want to understand that fully and see what the context is in relation to where we sit. alongside other trusts and so on. So we'll do that. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Just that's more on this point. I just wanted to add to what Martin said. The other point probably for the board, and in case I don't mention it when I come on to the finance update a bit later, yeah, I think it's 0.5 in the AAA under the advise section around the audit plan and timeline for the audit of the 22-23 accounts, which we've now subsequently to audit committee had formally confirmed via Audit Wales and Welsh Government, which does introduce a new auditing standard, which is going to be a bit of a challenge, I think, for a number of teams across NHS Wales, but also quite significant impact on the timelines. So the audited accounts will not be submitted now by the Auditor General for Wales into Welsh Government until the 31st of July, which is quite an extension certainly for the pre-pandemic, which was always, for a long time, we've got into this pattern of draft accounts end of April, audited accounts end of May. That extended a little bit during the pandemic, but it's extending quite a way out now rather than coming back to pre-pandemic timelines. So we're obviously going to be adjusting all the audit committee and board approval governance mechanisms to support all of that. But it's probably just worth noting that was a flag to that audit committee as well.
Good. Okay. Thanks very much. I think that probably concludes risk. And I think to Martin's point, I mean, he's right to raise it that, this board cannot abdicate the management of risk, but clearly the detail has to be dealt in the committees where many hours can be spent forensically looking at details that we just don't have the time for, and all of the people sitting around this table, all the exec directors are members of those committees and do that. But it's right that we also talk about it here as well, particularly those high risks, which we are now doing, and I think that's the right approach. Now on the agenda, we're playing on the break now, but I suggest we don't. We'll just check with Rachel if she's okay with this, because we haven't had the patient's story yet, which we're going to have after the break, and we are actually running ahead. The break was scheduled for 11:30. So if Rachel's okay for it, I wonder whether we should take your two topics, the IMTP topics now, then have a break. If you are okay with that.
Entirely up to you.
Well, if you're happy with that, and what I'm going to suggest is, because you've got two items 12 and 13. Item 12 is just looking at where we are in terms of this year, performance-wise, and I suggest perhaps, unless you've got anything pressing you want to say on that, we take the paper as read and just go for any questions on that, because the really important issue and the work we've got to do is to actually approve the IMTP plan, which you have supplied to us. So over to you, Rachel.
Yeah, more than happy. Thanks, Chair. So as you say, item 12 is a report which went to F&P, and it's the kind of draft end of Q4 position. I'm more than happy to take that as read and ask if there are any questions on that.
Does anybody have any questions on that item? It's fairly straightforward. Good. Okay. So in that case, I think over to item 13 and
lovely
for approval.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So this is the the highlight of every Director of Planning's year, to be able to present this to you, this plan to you. So again, you will have had a chance, hopefully, to read it, but acknowledging it came out later than other papers, because it's one of those things that, right at the end of the process, lots of people, add in and chip in and make various amendments. So apologies that you didn't have as many days as we would normally like for you to read in full. It has the draft, a slightly earlier draft went to F&P committee, so we had a good discussion at it there. But I suppose I just wanted to, if you don't mind, just pull out a few things, Chair. So the first thing I think to say is that although this is a requirement on us to produce an IMTP, it is also something I think as an organisation we are very strongly wedded to as a tool to give us kind of a sense of movement towards our strategy, a sense of clarity about what we as an organisation want to achieve, particularly in over the next 12 months, but over the course of the 3 years of this plan. And in developing this plan, there's always been a huge amount of engagement, from all parts of the organisation, which is always really pleasing to see. And I know that within directorates, that sit underneath this, there's always, more detailed plans which enable each directorate to really pick up and undertake things that will deliver this plan, on our behalf. So that's been really good as normal. I hope what you'll be able to see in the plan is, as I say, that link between our strategy, our long-term strategy, and you'll see at the very beginning of the plan is a section on, just reminding us of what our strategy is, what the strategic objectives are, and through the plan, then hopefully you can see how the actions that we're taking align to those strategic objectives. And within the detail of each section of the plan, we've got a series of almost ambition statements, some actions that we're taking, and then how that translates into outcomes or things that we can measure to take us to check, I suppose, against how well we're doing. And so we have tried in the last few years to have that sense of connection between the strategy, the actions, and the outcomes, which is really important. I think just to note a couple of things which linked to the discussion we've had. There's a really much stronger sense, I think, come through this year, particularly from our people. Some of that planned in road shows, but some of it, it was unplanned in the sense of the ability to meet people in departments and at picket lines, and a much stronger sense of that real frustration that people across all of our departments are feeling in terms of their work experience. Some of that out with our control, but some of it in our control. And so what we're saying in this plan is, yes, we want obviously to focus on improving things for patients, but equally we need to improve the workplace experience for our staff. And then we'll come on in a minute to the third emphasis in the plan, which we hope we can articulate well, which is around the financial sustainability agenda, which is a lot a stronger emphasis than it has necessarily been in previous years. So just picking up a couple of other things. One is just to record what the commissioners are feeling about the plan. So we have had a letter from our EASC colleagues, our CASC, to confirm that they're comfortable to approve the plan. So that's really positive. And we've discussed the highlights of it at the EASC committee. I didn't give them the detailed report, but we took them through a slide deck, kind of setting out the kind of salient points. We've had confirmation from Steve and Harry that he's happy to approve it. And Chris will talk a little bit about what that means in terms of some of the resources. The only caveat I'll put on that is that you'll see in the plan that the commissioners, or particularly the CASC, has articulated some outcomes. So, for example, you mentioned about sickness levels, but also, our UHP levels, our consultant close levels, and improvements in terms of red performance, in terms of a trajectory, improvements in terms of amber performance, in terms of a trajectory. And we have alluded in the narrative to the fact that some of those we're still not completely confident that we can achieve. And we have put a formal appendix back to him today, which set out, yes, we agree with your ambition there, but actually some of those things, particularly in terms of red and amber performance, are not entirely within our control. So we can't officially kind of sign up to and say, yes, we definitely will achieve those things. So, but on the whole, I think, the CASC is very happy with our plan. So that's good. In terms of the 111 team, obviously that's a smaller part of our service, but we have discussed our the key ambitions and actions within our plan at the 111 board a couple of days ago, and the commissioning board, which kind of sits below that a few weeks ago. Very much aligned in terms of the actions that we've articulated between what we want and their priorities. The caveat around the 111 side is that we still are working on that resource envelope. Now, it doesn't affect our bottom line, so what we're signing off today is still absolutely fine from a financial perspective, but we are seeking, as Jason, you mentioned yesterday, to move to a different kind of methodology of commissioning, whereby we look for a resource allocation within which we operate and deliver on outcomes that the commissioners have set, as opposed to a spend and recover model, which is what we've previously worked on. The detail of that is still being worked through. We've written formally to the 111 programme director, and we will have further conversations with them. It won't, as I say, it won't affect the bottom line of this plan, but it is something, as you know, that we're keen to work through. So that's their position in terms of the two commissioners. Just to touch a little bit, because obviously I say we talked in F&P about it. So a couple of comments came through. A couple of the of non-execs felt that there was perhaps a need to articulate a little bit more clearly the risks in terms of achievability of some of these actions, both in terms of the financial sustainability program that we're kind of be working through in the financial scenario, but also in terms of external influences which do affect our ability to, as we spent a lot of time this morning talking about. So I've added in a couple of paragraphs to kind of reflect that. And we also had a sense that we wanted to strengthen the section around the duty of quality and candour, which again I think we've done in one of the sections. So that was the kind of key feedback I think from F&P. In terms of delivering of this plan, you see the mechanisms every quarter in terms of how we monitor as an exec team. So we will continue to have our strategic transformation board who look at this in quite a bit of detail as we go through the year. We also have, as I mentioned, an expectation that there will be detailed directorate plans that sit underneath this. And we also will be using the quality and performance management framework as another tool which takes this kind of plan right the way through the organisation in terms of plans, metrics, performance management, etc. So hopefully that gives you an assurance that we've got a number of mechanisms that will allow us to progress this plan and monitor and assure ourselves in terms of delivery. So hopefully, I'm not going to go into the specifics of what the plan actually says we're going to do. You all had a chance to read that. And I don't think there's anything surprising in that. It's a continuation of the journey that we've been on. But I think we've tried to balance the need to continue to transform whilst understanding that there's things we have to do in the here and now. We can't just wait for a perfect strategy and a perfect plan to emerge. We've got to take opportunities. We've got to take action straight away, particularly around improving services for patients, but also improving the experience for our staff. So hope that makes sense, and happy to take any comments.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Let's go to geography. Sorry, geography.
Sorry, Chair. Just for report, if I come in just as the chair of FP, and just to go back a step, I should have mentioned at the last agenda item, we did discuss the INT Q4 progress as part of the agenda in the committee meeting, and that was noted by colleagues there, the excellent progress being made, and the committee was assured about the trust is doing everything within its control to make progress on those, and we also reviewed the audit report that came in, which gave us a reasonable assurance. So sorry, I should have covered that off for the last one. But just on the current one, again, I think, Rachel, you've mentioned that we had a good discussion about the INTP and where we're going. I think it was really brought out as part of the discussion how impressed we were on the content, especially with the feedback from the road shows. So it wasn't just the case that the staff engagement we went out and the CEO road shows, it was actually taking into account the feedback we'd received, assessing that and how that's going to be addressed, especially with regards to kind of flexible work and a shift overruns. But again, as Rachel alluded to, I think we were all keen that it's ambitious. As an organisation, we want to be ambitious, but it was also a case of maybe managing some of that ambition and being realistic in what we can achieve, what's in our control, and we achieve assurance on actually, yeah, we're in the right way of travelling. We want to continue with the ambition, but have a balanced expectation as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I should have addressed you because I should have asked you specifically. I'm surprised I didn't get a red note for that one. So, apologies. So we go to Paul and then come back to you, Chris.
Yeah, just to say, the plan. What I like about the plan is there's no surprises. What we've talked about over the year, what our ambition is going forward, is all contained in the plan. There's nothing that jumps out and you think, oh, I didn't know that was happening. So that's really good. I think it's easy to read. And one of the things we've been talking about with the people on culture plan is the issue about language, but the language is simple, it's understandable. So I think it's a really good plan, and demonstrates from the previous report that actually we do have plans that are actually delivered. Because you could have an IMTP that you don't deliver, but if you look at the Q4 report and then you look at this report, actually it's a continuation. And so I think it's a very good plan. I agree with Jogger. I think it balances the ambition with understanding the risks that we've got, particularly in the operating environment in which we sit. And you've also picked up the other issue, which is about potential changes in commissioning and how we would manage that interface. So very good plan, I think, Chair. Really good.
Thank you very much. Everybody okay? So the next stage is to move to Chris on the financial half of the plan.
Do you mind? I'm sorry,
Yes,
Chair. There's
yes,
one other thing
of course.
that I meant.
No.
It is in the paper, but I meant to mention it,
Okay.
and that is around the purpose. So
Oh, yes.
we do have within there a kind of semi-final purpose statement, and Trish has mentioned that is something that the board needs to approve in terms of, you know, as part of its kind of terms of references, etc. So just to note, we've been voting on which purpose visual we like. There's one more roadshow to come, but so I suppose we wanted you to note that is there.
Okay.
And you
This
know,
is to support, to serve,
yeah.
and to save.
It is
Right.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So I think at some point we will need to actually approve it, won't it, Trish? Yeah.
Okay. All right. Fine.
I was just a bit conscious we've got another roadshow, but
Yeah, I think we're being asked to approve the plan as it stands, aren't we?
Yes.
It's there, isn't there? So I suppose we approve it, maybe subject to.
Well, I mean, I think, Chairman, we seek to approve it now. I mean, whilst
Yeah.
we do have another roadshow, as Rachel rightly says, in a couple of weeks, because we had to defer one because of adverse
Yeah.
weather, you know, overwhelmingly the majority in favour through the 5 of the 6 roadshows we've had so far is for option A, which is in the paper. So I would go with.
Yeah, fine. Okay. No, that's good. I've emphasis clear. And whatever they.
Yeah.
It's not a Brexit.
Listen to their views,
No,
but they're not
no,
going to.
no, it's not.
It's not a 49.
No. So they're not going to break it. But in that case, let's move over to Chris to talk about the other half, which is the really important half, probably more important than ever, because you know finances are going to be so tight next year. So
Thank you, Chair.
over to the smiling face of Chris to tell us about finances.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to come in at that point. I say, which probably wanted to sort of just pick up on some of the detail underpinning the IMTP, which is a 3-year IMTP, although the financial plan, understandably, given the current outlook, is one that focuses very much on the 23-24 financial year. Based on what others have said, hopefully, I'd like to think that, you know, again, the contents of the plan that's provided isn't really of any surprise to anybody. Hopefully I've brought, and the team have brought you through the journey of the development of this plan, particularly those who attend Finance and Performance Committee, but we've had a number of other executive and indeed board development sessions on the development of the financial plan. So there's a lot of detail, which I think is right for the purposes of the outlook and the environment that we're working in, that will go in as part of the plan submission. There's a summary narrative within the main document, but then there's a very detailed annex, and then alongside that today, subject to the approval of the plan, there's an initial budget paper for approval before the beginning of the new financial year as well. But in a sense, and in essence, the plan comes down to a couple of, you know, there's a number of assumptions, there's a number of risks within the plan, but there's a few key ones which clearly board members will be fully aware of, but we just need to draw out in seeking to approve the plan. So it is presented as a plan that has the ability to balance in year, and I describe it in that way. It's not in the typical sense that I would prefer to present to the board ahead of a new financial year, a fully balanced financial plan. But it's certainly got a plan that has the ability to balance, bearing in mind that we don't need to have a balanced position for next financial year today. We need to be able to have confidence that we can deliver that balanced position by this time next year, by the time of landing into next financial year. So that's the first thing. Within that, the key assumptions are, we've touched on one already, around the impact of the additional 100 full-time equivalents frontline EMS staff that we've been funded for non-recurrently this year. The plan assumes that we will be funded for the just under £6 million cost impact of that from next year. Now, that is an assumption that is supported by the CASC and by the commissioners, and is mirrored in the East IMTP. The East IMTP makes the same assumption. It assumes that they will be in the financial values funding us for those 100 whole-time equivalents. In the East Skye MDP, my understanding is that it assumes that they will be able to access additional central funding in year to do that. So I guess the point for me on that is, on the one hand, yep, that's great. East said, supported us to make those assumptions, and therefore quite rightly we've done so. But we're also mindful of the fact that we need to see the colour of the money, if you like. We need to understand that the assumptions that East are making in their plan are deliverable as well. So as part of the correspondence chain over the last few days, there's been a response back that's been very clear to Stephen as the Commissioner, thanking him for that support, and we recognise the assumptions and the management of that through the process of approving the plan. But we also need to understand that we need to see some traction and movement fairly quickly in the year as we get into it, to see the money flowing through us and identification of that funding source to support it, and what we may have to do if that's not available and deliverable early in the year. So that's a very key one, clearly. The second main key one is the level of savings, and even after that, to balance, we're looking at something in the region of about a £6 million savings and delivery plan, and cost avoidance and cost containment and all that comes with that plan, which is significant. It's a step up. 4.3 million has been the level this year, so it's a step up from that, and 4.3 million this year was quite a step up from the last couple of years, which has been less than 3 million. So again, the other bit to add to that, to that which I sort of said at the outset, is we're not coming into the year with a fully worked up, deliverable £6 million savings plan. We've got in the region of about 3.5 million, which we got reasonable confidence that we've got a line of sight of how we're going to deliver. So through the work of the financial sustainability programme, which I'm sure Angie can add more to if we need to, we've got, and the paper, the detailed annex, does describe all the areas that we're progressing on this, and we've got some significant work kicking off fairly shortly around, admin reviews and service reviews and everything, which will inevitably deliver additionality to that. But as we enter the year, we got about 2.5, 2.6 million that we've got to spend the first quarter of the year getting to where we ideally would like to be now. But things don't stop on the 31st of March. They will continue, and we will continue to deliver on that. And my advice, if you like, from a professional sort of finance perspective to the board, is assuming the assumption holds for the 6 million and the 100 whole-time equivalent funding element of the plan, I have confidence that we will be able to work up the deliverability of the balance of the savings, so there will be a balanced plan in here. That's the two main key assumptions that remain within the plan. There's a couple of others that are highlighted up front. Obviously, some of these are a bit more general, more generic, I guess, in the sense of, the plan assumes that the level of estimates of costs that we've put in for some significant cost pressures is no greater in year than is in the plan. That's almost a given, isn't it? But again, the significant ones there are around some of the continuing potential volatility around prices, particularly in terms of energy, utilities, fuel, etc. Although movement currently is more favourable than adverse in terms of some of that. And obviously we do need to keep an eye on a couple of things. We need to keep an eye on what might result as impacts from any of the resulting settlements that may land from hopefully a way to get through the industrial action position. And I think, as we touched on yesterday, there will always be in-year pressures. There will be in-year costs. There will be things that we need to do, whether that's COVID inquiry, duty of candor, duty of quality. There's the things that we're going to have to put in resources or find some way to support, that we'll have to find a way of managing. You'll see in the budget setting paper, when we come on to that, the plan does continue to hold a small contingency. It's £1 million. It's been £1 million all the time I've been in the organisation. So we haven't, unfortunately, I'd like to have been able to slightly increase that. Maybe we're not in that position. So we have got a small element in the scheme of things that we can manage some of those in-year pressures, not currently at least with. That's the key assumptions. A lot of detail within it, and some of the history, I think, which has been important from an audit trail perspective about how all this has been built up. But hopefully that provides the board with what they need to support the approval of the IMTP with this financial plan underpinning it.
Good, thank you, Chris. And just a welcome to Navin, who's on the screen.
I should have done that.
So welcome to Navin. Hopefully you can hear us. And
absolutely. Well, and thanks to Navin and the team in terms of some of the further development of this, particularly over the last few weeks when I haven't been about as much as I would have liked. So yeah, sorry, Chair, I should have done
Yeah,
that.
and thanks from the board, Navin, for stepping in and doing what was necessary when it was necessary. I think, what I take from this, the board will need active in managing the financial position of the trust on a month-by-month basis than we probably ever have before, because we're going into this basically on a promise, really, isn't it? We're saying that we will deliver a balance, but we're not 100% certain quite how, and there are still a few unknowns in terms of monies which may be received. So there could be some ups and downs of the money as we go through the year, and some of the savings that we have to make are known, but quite a sizable chunk of savings have yet to be, really identified and found. So we will have potentially to make decisions as the year unfolds. So a few people to come in. Martin wants to come in as well, but Jogger was first. So Jogger, and then we'll go to, I think, do you want to come in, Jason? Yes. So Jogger, Jason.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, so for colleagues and the board, we had a conversation of last FEC meeting about where the finance is going. We're under no illusion about the difficult year financially we're coming up to and the hard choices that need to be made. And Chris gave us a good presentation and detailed kind of responses of where we got to go, what we need to do, what is being explored, and they are and colleagues in the financial team are looking at all options. So with regards to the savings that need to be made, they are considering all options, and we will monitor that as a committee and report back to the board. And then with regards to the recurrent funding, one thing we did kind of emphasize, and I think it is being followed up on, is to make sure that there is a deadline for us to get a response. It's not something that just can be continuously pushed down the road. So as soon as we have a firm response, we will report back to the board. But it's something that we are pushing and having a deadline. But it was something that had a good discussion during the committee meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Chairman. It's on the point that Jog has just made. So on the 106 million, the significant assumption that Chris has just described, we do need to crystallise this quite quickly. So we have set a deadline with commissioners of 8 weeks, essentially from now to the end of May. We've been clear that if we don't see line of sight to the recurrent funding for that 6 million, circa 6 million, by the end of May, we will need to deploy actions to back out the growth that's been put in on a non-recurrent basis. So essentially, we've got a clock of 8 weeks is ticking for the system to coalesce around and crystallise a funding source.
Good, thanks so much. Few are queuing up. So we've got Martin, then we've got Liam, and then we've got Martin.
One's a quick question, so I'll get that out of the way. And the other one is the comment about the financial risk. The one quick question is, I noticed there's a section in here about what commissioners want, and then there's a lot of discussion or content about what our plan is. The only discrepancy I could see was on sickness levels, and I was just wanting to know what the commissioners are saying about that. They want 5.5%. We've planned for 6%. Now, I'm not saying what's right or wrong. I just wanted to know, is that discrepancy accepted? It's written into the report, so I just
So that was one of the, when I was saying earlier, one of the things we've written back formally to them to say what's our view of each of those expectations. And on that one, we have said we cannot make 5.5%. We are aiming, as we put in our trajectory last year, to get to 6% by the end of next year, and then perhaps down the third year further. But we've made that clear in a number of meetings with them throughout the last 6 weeks since that number has been articulated.
Right.
So we will continue to make, it hasn't been raised by them as a major bone of contention now.
It's not a huge difference, but still, we're still aiming at a fairly high percentage. 6 is still high. Anyway, I'm just making the point that if I was the other side of the table, I don't think I'd be happy.
Well, in last year's, and I think that's absolutely right. In last year's IMTP, we obviously were at a much higher starting position. We said we wanted to get down to 8 by the end of this year, which we've pretty much done. We then came down to 6%, and then maintain a 6%. And the reason we've gone for 6% is that that's what was articulated in the D&C review. When you looked at us in comparison to other ambulance services, that was kind of
where they are.
where they are. So it's not to say, don't, obviously we'd love
No,
to see
I-
it even lower
okay.
than that, wouldn't we? And that, I'm sure that'll be, once we get to 6%, you'll be then looking at, what's the opportunities, what's the potential to.
That is a figure for the whole trust, isn't it?
Yes.
An average, and we know that the call centres, particular ones, experience a much higher level of turnover and sickness as a consequence of all sorts of things. So anyway, Andrew, just quickly, and then we'll come
Just to come back, Martin, I think the aspiration is always we want to be down, because I know we're compared in comparison to the trust health boards in Wales and not in comparison to the ambulance sector. To me, the 6% feels realistic and ambitious at this stage against the backdrop of what we're dealing with in the organisation. That does not mean, though, that if we can get beyond that, we wouldn't actively.
No, I get that. It's just it's a little bit of a black mark. It's been there for some years now, and I would really like not to have it on our agenda. I'm sure all of us would say that, but
I think Liam.
Yeah, just a comment really in terms of the first presentation of the IMTP and a subsequent one in terms of our financials. I wouldn't underestimate the desire of the exec to be able to move more freely in the way in which we deliver on the 111 service. I think we recognise there's a lot of opportunity in the 6 Goals programme, and Brendan identified earlier some of the concerns we have about pace, and our sense would be that the 6 Goal programme leadership team might be able to deploy into other spaces where pace would be really important, and we could pick up some of the slack that they might leave and deliver potentially as effectively, if not more effectively, I think we would feel. And I say that out loud because I think it has opportunities on 3 fronts for all parties. Firstly, for our people, Andy and I have just hosted joint away days between our teams, and the thinking that is going on with clinical training teams, with clinical leads on the 2 clinical support desks that support both 999 and 111 delivery, are really clear about how they would like to work closer together, and we would want to be able to facilitate that. We think that would enhance patient experience as a result. Those benefits have a benefit to the system in terms of how people access and utilise care, and of course if we've got all of that, then theoretically at least we find a financial benefit if you can bring things closer together. So I just take the public opportunity to reinforce the desire that we collectively have to be able to take what is a really good service already and move it to the next level at a time when we know the NHS is going to be under significant pressure.
Yep, absolutely. Paul.
Yeah, just to say that in closed session of the People and Culture Committee, obviously the financial sustainability programme will have an effect or have implications for staff. So it'll be reported through the P&C committee as well as through F&P to get the people perspective, because fundamentally it will involve people. It's our biggest resource.
So just moving things along so we can get to our coffee break.
I think Navin's good.
Navin, do you want to come in? See him up here.
Sorry, no,
okay.
my mistake.
So any final questions? We've got to do 2 things. We have actually got to approve the written document, the plan, and also we've got to approve the revenue budget as a separate item.
The initial, I highlight that.
Indeed.
Initial.
Indeed, I've got to approve the initial. So before I ask whether we're approving that, can we just check if there's any final questions that anybody wants to raise to either to Rachel or to Chris and Estelle?
In the very minor observation, because we're approving the document, I've literally in the last half hour just sent an slightly updated section on partnerships to Rachel and Alex, simply because it's a function of a very recent meeting I've had with Welsh Government, so that it's as accurate as it can be. It's not material.
Okay.
I just wanted to flag that because obviously there'll be a record of what we're approving today. So
yeah. Yeah, and presumably that's not in the document that we've seen.
It's not in the document.
No, that's understood.
It's basically just around regional partnership boards, where there will be a consultation in 23-24 is likely to see us gain a seat. It's set out currently as an absolute. It is subject to a consultation, but the likelihood is. Fine. So I just made that amendment.
Yeah.
I mean, we did say in the covering thing that there are a couple of other minor things that people are still filling around with the edges. Indeed. So, but they won't be material in terms of what the plan is there. So it will be very slightly different when the very final document that's submitted tomorrow. But
No problem. So, three things actually, because I had another yellow note. Exciting, isn't it? Another yellow note. It's only yellow, so we're okay. We've actually got to approve the purpose as well. So let's do that. Are we content as a board to approve the purpose that's being displayed in the document?
Yes, very much so.
excellent.
Good. I'll leave you, Jason, to tell the last roadshow.
Yes.
It has been approved without their formal consent. The second thing we have to do is to approve the document itself with the caveats that there may be some minor changes, but not material changes. So we're happy to do that. And thirdly, that we're approving the how did you describe it?
If we
indicative?
it's the initial
Initial
23-24 revenue budget, which is a detailed sort of subset of that plan and how it translates to the delegated budget. I will describe it as initial because of where we are. We're having to develop further savings and other movements within the plan. And as is always the case, myself and Jason will now sit down during Q1 with directors to have a more detailed discussion around their delegated budget. But as per our SFIs, it would be really helpful if the board could approve the initial budget set, mindful that it will change as we go through the year.
Indeed. So just looking around, are we content to approve the initial budget? Good. All right. Now, look, it's 22, near enough. We'll take our coffee break now, and then when we come back, we'll be refreshed and we'll go straight into the patient story. Are we? Staff story, not patient. That was nearly another yellow note, wasn't it?
Sorry.
No, you're right. You'll all have notes next time. So staff story, so we'll have a coffee break, and then will that be okay, Alex? Are you set up for that? Brilliant. Because then we can come back and give that the attention it deserves when we've had a chance to stretch our legs and have a coffee. A biscuit maybe, who knows? So it is 22. Shall we try and get back by 5 to 15 minutes, 5 to 12, and move into the staff story? Good. So we're all ready to go. She's almost exhausted the first supply. So it's not the patient story, it's a staff story. Who's going to introduce the staff story? If anybody is. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So today we're going to hear a video from one of our colleagues, Sandra Pollard. Sandra is a clinical operationals manager in 111 service. And just for some context, Sandra approached me at one of our first roadshows a couple of weeks ago when we after we ran the session around the impact of industrial action, how people had felt about industrial action, some of the challenges around it. And she had a really sort of quite strong response to the discussion, and I said, oh, perhaps you'd like to share your sort of journey over the last 4 months with the board and perhaps the wider community. So she kindly agreed to do a video for us. She would have been here herself, but she's on annual leave, and I didn't feel we could ask her to cancel her annual leave. So with no further ado, are you okay, Alex, to share the video, and then we'll have an opportunity perhaps for comments and just observations. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sandra Pollard. I'm a clinical manager with NHS 111 Wales. First of all, could I just thank you for inviting me to share my story, my experience during the industrial action. In my 40 years of being with the NHS, I've never really been involved in any industrial action. The only time I can remember any industrial action was when I was a student nurse and I washed the dishes because the housekeepers were on strike. Other than that, I've never come across industrial action within the NHS until now. And I suppose the difference is I very much felt in the thick of it during the recent industrial action. About 2 weeks before the first industrial action day in December, our head of service, Pete Brown, he pulled the management team together so that we could discuss how we would best manage the service operationally with the possibility of hugely depleted staffing levels. I remember feeling quite alarmed and concerned that potentially there could be a situation whereby we had very few nurses, and to optimise clinical safety was going to be very challenging. So what did we do? Well, as a team, as an operational team, we examined the tactics that we use in escalation, but we also devised additional tactics that we might have to use come worst case scenario, so to speak. In terms of being prepared for the Industrial Action Day, we had this portfolio of tactics that was going to be utilised. The important thing then, of course, is that these tactics are communicated effectively, because without the communication, then things fall down. So what we devised, in addition to our usual channels of communication, was a wall board. So on this wall board, in all the clinical contact centres, whichever tactic was going to be used, that's the tactic that was displayed. So instantly call handlers would be able to look up at the wall board and see exactly what tactic they had to use, and they would know how to employ that tactic and what they had to do. And indeed, on the Industrial Action Days, these wall boards were hugely effective and staff found them hugely beneficial, and so therefore operations went very smoothly. There were other issues with regards to communication that on reflection I felt went really well, which meant for me as a clinical manager, I felt confident that we were delivering the best possible service and optimising clinical safety within NHS 111 Wales. In relation to communication channels, I think communication went really well on the day in relation to our communication with the health boards, because this was really important, because NHS 111 Wales can transfer calls over to the health boards hubs if the clinical situation is appropriate. So that was just really important that we maintained that communication. We had good communication channels with the clinical desk, our clinical colleagues on the clinical desk, whereby we had a point of contact in order to discuss clinical calls on the stack that NHS 111 Wales could accept. This was really important because it's all about supporting one another and being able to maintain the most effective service delivery. We always work closely with our colleagues on the clinical desk and in the health boards, but I think on the Industrial Action Days it just for some reason seemed to be even more important, because we were facing really uncharted waters, so working collaboratively and teamwork was so essential, and I feel that paid off hugely. On the Industrial Action Days, the 111 management team met regularly throughout the day to examine how operations was going, but these meetings also provided a support network, because we were facing very different circumstances in terms of just the nature of what was causing the operational pressure. So that gave it, the fact that it was industrial action seemed to give it a different flavour, and that support was needed. From a personal perspective, I found the issue of industrial action quite difficult. I am an RCN member, and the RCN had balloted, and the decision was to take industrial action. And I support that cause. I am very mindful that the NHS is suffering very difficult times, particularly in terms of the loss of staffing. Nurses are leaving in their droves, and other healthcare workers are also leaving the NHS due to the poor pay, difficult circumstances that they have to work under. But to make a decision, if I was going to take industrial action, if I was going to strike, I found it very, very challenging. I wanted very much to support the cause, but I also was very mindful that if I did take strike action, that's going to impact on service delivery in terms of there's going to be one clinician less, and one manager less. I found this very, very hard. I felt torn between the cause and my conscience and letting people down and not wanting to let anybody down. So this was really challenging. I know that I'm not the only person that felt torn about strike action, because I spoke to lots of colleagues about their feelings, and I know that they felt exactly the same as well. And at the end of the day, whilst I did come to a decision, I mean, even now, I'm not really sure if that decision was the right one.
And I hope, and I just wanted to say really appreciative of Sandra just to share that sort of very personal journey. And I think throughout the roadshows and when we were talking to people on the lines and colleagues who were providing support during that time, we really noticed, and I know Jason uses the term conflicted, and I think that was partly why Sandra approached us and said, oh, that really resonates with how I feel. And I did think it would be quite powerful for us to observe that. And I think the story of Sandra is actually a story we've seen replicated across, the whole trust. But yes, I hope you all found that useful and impactful, because I do think it does bring to life some of the challenges we've experienced previously, but it's not over yet. So happy to take any comments or questions.
Just a comment, if I can, Chair. At the Cardiff roadshow, I was just impressed by how open people were. And we're doing the Speaking Up Safely work. I just felt, well, people had the confidence to say those things in a public forum. So I think that's really important. We recognise that it was difficult for staff, but they felt able to express themselves. And I don't think that happens in lots of organisations. So I think that's something to be proud of, really.
Great.
Thank you. I mean, listening to Sandra and knowing Sandra, I also know how genuine that was. I've been taking some of the elements that Sandra's touched on, of course, always, as in times of difficulty, our teams come together, and despite very difficult decisions and different decisions that people are making or were making, that still happened with that real sense of teamwork and being in the situation together. There are, I think, what you can see from Sandra, and certainly a point that we've discussed at roadshows, is that there is going to be a lasting consequence for this with people. I mean, Sandra even saying there that even now she's wondering if she did the right thing, but also within teams. And I know that we'll be turning our minds to how we, in a sense, recover from what's happened. But I think, your point there, Paul, it has been two signals for me. The first is, as an organisation, we haven't been shy to engage in the conversation with our people. And this is not the only topic where I think that's showing itself, which for me is a real signal of our maturity and openness and want. But as you said, to then have our people actively engaging back very openly in that has, I hope, is something that we can begin to take away in terms of the start of creating this safe space. So just a few bits, some reflections really from me.
Yeah, very helpful. One kind of hopes, and I suppose that decision of whether to strike or not to strike, and where you take that personal line, because everybody would have been faced with that same dilemma. One hopes that whichever decision people took, the people who took the opposite view can be sympathetic to that, because it probably wasn't an open and shut case for many of them. They were right, feeling all sorts of conflicts, drawing them in one direction than another. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed much the same. I was at the Swansea Roadshow last week, and the table that I was sat on, it hit people hard, you know, they didn't know what to do. And even now, coming out of it, hopefully, coming out of the industrial action, it's still with people, isn't it? They are still very much thinking along those lines. You could see that, it was palpable. The other comment I wanted to make, Chair, is I dialed into one of the WAST live sessions that Jason and his team were facilitating, you know, the night before the day of industrial action. And you know, it was very clear to me the balance that we were striking in terms of being supportive of staff and recognising this was a difficult thing for them to decide what to do. They were torn. I just felt the balance was right, and I was impressed by what I saw. And as a non-executive director, that really did make me feel very comfortable that we were doing all we could to manage what is an exceptionally difficult situation for everybody, as well as it could be handled. So, you know, on that basis, I would just thank all of the execs for all that they've done, and your teams as well, because this would not have been easy for any of you either.
I would certainly echo that. Any other thoughts, comments on that story? Okay, in that case, thank you, Alex, for sorting the technology out, and Angela for bringing that to our attention. And pass our thanks to I've met her as well. She's really lovely. Okay, so we can move on to the last few items of substance. And the first one is the financial performance. So we're in month 11. Not long to go now. It's less than 36 hours now.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chair. And in the vein of, I think, other papers today, probably we'll take it as read and ask for any questions. Just before I do so quickly, I guess. Just to note again that this builds on a sort of fairly detailed presentation on the month 11 position that was taken to the Finance Performance Committee last week. As you say, it's very close to the financial year end now. The continued good performance is evident from the paper and where we expect to land over the next couple of weeks in terms of striking the year end position for the draft accounts. As you would expect from a revenue perspective, given where we are in the financial year, much of the risks that were previously being described have been removed or mitigated or managed as we get much closer to land in the year-end position. The only other thing to add was, and based partly on the conversation at F&P last week, there's a little bit more, not a lot, but a little bit more detail, because this paper obviously, and, the plan we talked about earlier for next year focuses on revenue, but there's a little bit more update on our capital position, because I think a bit of assurance on landing that capital position as close to the notes as we can do by literally midnight tomorrow night. So I just provided a little bit more detail around some of the year-end adjustments that we've had to make to manage some of the capital schemes, which inevitably, because of the nature of them, straddle financial years. A more detailed update on where we actually landed will come through in May, but I was just mindful, I think there was a couple of queries on the capital position at F&P, so hopefully that provides a little bit more assurance. But as I say, Chair, happy to take any questions.
Okay, so
yes, Chair, same as mentioned earlier, it was a good discussion at FP. Pleased to note that we're heading for a balanced outcome at the end of the year. And well done to Chris and his team. That we appreciate the financial pressures they've been under, but we've been regularly updated and monitoring those as we go through the course of the year.
Good. Any other questions to Chris? We're asked to review, comment, note, receive assurance that we're going to end the year on a balanced financial position. Good. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chris. So now on to the next item, monthly integrated quality and performance report, which Rachel is yours.
Thank you very much. So some of this we will have covered, I guess, in terms of the previous discussions earlier this morning. And obviously this report went to F&P as well as the overarching committee, and I know slightly earlier iterations would have gone to the People and Culture Committee as well. I'm not sure when I can't remember now when the last quest was, so the quest may not have seen the very last, this most recent edition. So just pulling out a couple of things, if I could. I know people have read it, but it's I did want to have some good news. So in terms of our 999 call answering times, really positive improvement there, and although the median call answering times remain at 2 seconds, they have done for a long time. We've seen tails that have been, unacceptably long, really, and that has come right down. So that's really, really good to see. And all credit to the team within that area. We know we don't have an additional resource. We haven't been able to resource any additional capacity in there. So they've done a huge amount of work trying to manage and balance capacity. So well done to them, I think. And I just wanted to pull out, because we talked a lot about the 999 service kind of earlier, but in terms of the 111 service, we do still see, poor call answering times, and that is something that our commissioners that we talked a little bit about earlier in the IMTV, it's a real priority that we do. So for us and for our commissioners, we do need to see an improvement in that call answering time, particularly the balance between weekends and days, where there's quite a big discrepancy. So we, as part of our IMTP, will have seen there's a range of actions that we think we can take to actually make a difference there. In terms of the clinical ringback times, actually, you'll see that those have improved significantly, and actually pretty, for the first time for a long time, all categories of callers were being rung back within the time, allocation that we've set. And I think whilst that's good, we just as a board need to recognise that there's a lot that sits under that. So as part of the business continuity incident, and as part of changes we made as a result of system pressures, I think we move a lot more. GPs are taking a lot more off the stack. So demand has gone down slightly. That may or may not be the right thing for the patient. So I think we just need to treat that with a little bit of caution, but certainly from a kind of a metric perspective, which is something that the commissioners look at, that was good. I won't focus on the EMS side at all, because we've had a really good conversation on that. But just in terms of some of the kind of people metrics, as we've said already, there's been some really good progress in terms of our sickness absence levels, which is really positive. But we have seen a bit of a dip in terms of PADR. And also, it is probably just worth picking out that the stat and man training had decreased. It was a very noticeable decrease. It was kind of like jumped out at you. But the reason for that is that there's been a new course added to the suite of courses that are mandatory. And of course, I think it was only February that it was introduced. Of course, it'll take a bit of time for that. And that percentage has pulled the whole percentage down. So it's not as worrying as you might initially think. And the other thing, just to pull out again, going through in terms of the quadrants, the system contribution, and we pulled this out already, but we hit the 15% in just about in January, just slightly lower in February. But that, in terms of consultant close rate, is a really big improvement. And again, huge amounts of work on all sorts of kind of things within the team to make that happen, and more to do, which obviously moves through into our IMCP for next year. So I think the summary is, again, and we when you look at the first dashboard of the slide deck with the metrics, we've got the quality indicators that are almost all red. So we do know and we recognise that is not where we want them to be. But some good news in some of those areas, which is positive, and clearly the IMTP is a vehicle by which, as we discussed now, we continue to press forward in terms of improvements in all of these areas. We will, in the first month now in next year, review some of these metrics, and we've committed to kind of reviewing these annually. So we will look at our IMTP, we will look at what's there at the moment, and my team will kind of come forward with this proposal to execs in terms of any changes to some of those metrics, which will come through obviously in due course to board, well, F&P first, and then board for sign off. Thank you.
Good. Any questions or comments? Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's good.
I think there's some, really good progress in here, isn't there? As you've already said, the 999 answering and the consultant close. I wanted to come back to the 111 call answering, and obviously you're talking here about the uplift of 10 and the other work around sickness absence. And I just wondered what the trajectory is on that in terms of, you know, when do you expect to see some of that helping with the performance?
I mean, I don't know whether Lee wants to say anything particularly on that. I know we reported that, you know, that the recruitment is underway at the moment in terms of the next cohort of call handlers. What will make probably more of a difference is the re-rostering that we do need to do. Now that isn't an overnight piece of work at all, and it'll probably be 3 to 6 months, I guess, before that's properly, and that's particularly that balance between weekend and weekday. So I would say we'd see some improvements as we get the capacity higher, but longer term kind of, you know, more fundamental improvements, perhaps a little bit further into the year. We haven't got a trajectory on it particularly, but perhaps that would be useful. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Lynn, sorry.
I mean, no, you're right on the staff numbers. I think there's a course that's coming out now, if not already just popped out, and there's another one scheduled for May, so they should be good to get us to our new green establishment. Interestingly, one of the areas that I do hear the team talk about is the in hours versus out of hours, and at the rates of in hours contacts when, of course, primary care is open. And so there may be something in terms of how demand presents. Now, of course, for us as the potential gateway to care of the future, actually in hours contacts not necessarily problematic, but of course at the moment the current system doesn't see primary care as open, and so if primary care is open, would be some questions around why there may be either the public thinking we use 111 or of course being referred to 111. Primary care is open, so there could potentially be something underneath there as well.
I think just to reflect back to is that I recently visited Planet House and I saw that play out. Actually, I was sat with the call handler and, you know, I was asking about demand for the day and they said, well, it's primary care, as GP practices, then, you know, the demand is spiking. And yeah, it was a really helpful visit for me to, you know, to meet some of the staff and understand some of those challenges, because we've talked already quite a bit today about morale and of course, you know, appreciate that we're doing all we can, but you know, they're seeing all of those calls waiting and people having a bad experience, that's going to impact on staff well-being, isn't it?
It does. Just one other thing is that there is such a difference in presentation. So take Saturday, you know, its presentation is so different from a Thursday, in hours, out of hours, and volume, and that does on an establishment at 188. It does present a real challenge when you have got such peaks and troughs in the demand profile. And that particularly plays out, for example, with Easter coming up, when on certain days over the bank holiday, we see that activity increase by 100, 200, 300% in comparison to a non-bank holiday. And so there is a real challenge in us being able to manage the peaks and troughs in the establishment that's funded.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. My comment is in relation to paragraph 14, which refers to the Putting Things Right team. And I know we did talk about this, I think it was in F&P recently, certainly a recent committee meeting, because the report does say the Trust is concerned for the welfare of this team, given the complexity and the number of complaints that we receive in as a result of the pressures we've all talked about. I just wanted to, you know, assure other board colleagues that during that discussion, you know, we were assured that we are providing all manner of support and everything we can do. The one comment I wanted to mention was clearly in light of the Act coming into being now on the 1st of April and the impact of the duty of candour inevitably on the PTR team, I think we need to continue to keep an even closer eye on this, because I think the pressure is going to be increased further given the requirements placed on us in responding to the duty of candour. So I think it's one they're under immense pressure now. as indeed most of our staff are. But I think this team, they will have increased pressure from April, the duty of care.
That's almost inevitable. Did you want to make a
No,
comment?
no, Lee covered my
okay.
point on the
Fine.
one paper earlier.
Fine, good. So, any final questions on the data? We are asked. I'm just going to remind myself. We're asked to consider the data, that it provides us sufficient assurance, and whether there's any further information, scrutiny assurance is required for any further remedial action. It is, of course, February data, isn't it? And we're almost in April. So, and a lot has happened in that intervening time since this was produced. So we are looking back on this data a bit. And we heard from Jason, of course, earlier that the March position has returned almost to a December position. So we have to take that into consideration when we consider all these matters. But I assume that we're all content with that. So if we are, we will move on. We are moving towards some of the routine items. Now, item 16 is board approval, but it's approval for the terms of reference for the partnership agreements. But actually, Trish is just going to take this item.
Thank you. So just as a reminder that the standing orders has the committees, 7 committees of the board, as well as the ability for us to have an advisory group or more than one advisory group. For us, it is one. It is in the standing orders known as a local partnership forum, but I think it has for some time been known as the Welsh Ambulance Service Partnership Team, or WASP, which was reconstituted last year. So these terms of reference have been, as Paul indicated previously, have been to People and Culture Committee. And there was a slight amendment to that, so they're here for approval. But just a couple of things to pull out. At 3.9, you'll see the ability for WASP to establish subcommittees. There's quite a bit of work about what those substructures, if you like, look like that sit under WASP. And we've had a couple of meetings on those, and the next meeting that we've got next month, we'll pull that out in much more detail. So I'd ask formally that the board, because the board has to approve subcommittees of committees, so if the board could formally note and approve that those substructures will be formed. You'll see that we have the membership at section 4. I'd just like to pull out, so we've got joint chairs. We've got Jason as one of the chairs, and we've got Mark Marsden from the staff representative as the other chair, and they alternate the meetings, chairing of the meetings. You'll see at 4.2, there's just been a slight amendment to that. So we've got here halfway through 4.2, what we had intended was that we would look at the substructures and then re-look at the numbers. But what we've got here is really probably a foregone conclusion that it's going to go to 8. But what we'd like to do is just change it to say that the numbers will be reviewed, because we need to look at that when we look at the substructures. So there's just a slight amendment to that. The only other things to point out is that our standing orders do say that our meetings are held in public unless the board approves otherwise. And given the sensitivity of some of the issues discussed here, we've suggested that this will be a private meeting. It will do a AAA into the People and Culture Committee. Standing orders do say that this committee reports through the executive to the board, but we thought it was more appropriate that it goes through the People and Culture Committee on a AAA report, and then they include it in each of their reports on any escalations that way. So I think that is probably all I have just for approval today, and it will form part of the annual effectiveness reviews that we do every year as well. It will come through the People and Culture Committee.
Okay, good. Any questions or comments on that? We're looking for the approval in terms of reference, bearing in mind that subcommittees might be formed, so we need to approve that, and the numbers being 8 people. Good. Okay, all done. The next item relates to something that we've pretty much done really, which is just to take a few moments out with the chairs for each of the committees. We focus on the AAA reports, but let's just take the time to make sure there's nothing that anybody wants to add. So, can we just go through on the list with Quest first? Was there anything, Bethan, that you wanted to add?
I covered it earlier, thank you.
Grand. And Paul on People and Culture? No. All okay. Martin on audit?
Only on the annual audit report that's been added. That's the the Wales audit report. Just to note that that's going to be taken in a session with the board. That's at a board development day. Okay. So whilst it's been discussed at audit committee, it will be moved on to. Yep. So that was the issue we talked about earlier this morning, but just to follow.
Okay. Good, that's fine. And Jog, anything on finance?
Nothing there, Chair. We've discussed those
Dealt
earlier.
with that. I didn't have anything to add on the remuneration committee. Kerry, anything on the charitable funds?
I think it's self-explanatory, Chair,
Okay.
unless you want me to go.
No,
through,
just something you felt.
notices.
Yeah, no, that's grand. Good. Okay, indeed. Next item is an approval. We just asked to approve the minutes of the Board of Trustees, which took place in February. Looking around, everybody's content with that. No one's objecting. Good. We'll formally approve that. We've got some consent items next. A governance report for information. Trish, anything to say on that? No. We've got a variety of minutes of the various committee meetings which were appended to the papers. So I'm going to assume everybody's seen those. Similarly, minutes for the Joint Wales Committee update reports, and they're all there as well. Okay. So we come to the closing items of this part of the meeting, which is any other business. If anybody's got anything they wish to raise, matter of urgency. No. Good. We have a date of the next meeting, which is in May, which will be back here again, I believe. And so all that remains is to close this meeting. Thank you very much indeed. And to ask for the exclusion of press, members of the public, invite the press and public to leave the meeting because the next part is our confidential session. Thank you very much indeed. Okay.